call the Senate to order. Sergeant Arms will please secure the chamber doors. Members, please take your seats. Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Mr. President.
All right, Senators, we are very pleased today on this Tuesday, March 11th, to have Reverend Ali Casey Bell from the Cedar Lane Unitarian Universalist Congregation in Bethesda, Maryland, guest of the distinguished senator from the 18th District. Please rise for the invocation.
We gather in gratitude for those who have answered the call to serve the people of Maryland, spirit of wisdom and justice. Bless these leaders who sit in deliberation, carrying the weight of decisions that shape lives, communities, and futures. May they be guided by wisdom that transcends partisanship, by compassion that uplifts the most vulnerable, and by courage that calls them to act for the common good. Holy One, we commend their service, knowing that governance is both privilege and responsibility. Strengthen them in times of challenge, grant them clarity in moments of uncertainty, and remind them always that their work is not for some, but for all who call Maryland home. May justice flow like water in this chamber. May equity be the measure of every policy. May love be the spirit that moves their hands and hearts. And may the work they do in this place bring forth a future of dignity, opportunity, and peace for all. With gratitude and hope, we pray, Amen, Ashe, blessed be.
Recognizing the senator from the 18th District.
Thank you, Mr. President. Reverend Bell is a minister in my legislative district at the wonderful Cedar Lane Unitarian Universalist Congregation. He emphasizes pastoral care as well as the interconnectedness of all people and all things. Reverend Bell and we are joined by his wife, Karen Bell, on the floor. And I move that we thank the Reverend and his remarks be journalized. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. And without objection, we certainly will journalize the invocation this morning. Thank you for your efforts in the community and for being here with us today.
Thank you.
We could all use more love these days. That is for sure. All right. Has everyone recorded their presence? It appears to actually be so. The clerk will take the call. With 47 members in the chamber, the Senate of Maryland is now fully back in session on day 72.
Mr. President?
Yes, recognizing.
I would just like to change my vote from green to red.
Yes. No. We object. In all seriousness, we're here. We had lots of transitions, lots of movement, lots of illnesses and sicknesses. We're here. We're all here for the last 4 weeks. We're in full game time now. Although it's not a game, it's real important stuff. But this is the important moment of 4 weeks to go. 4 weeks from now, 28 days from now, we'll be headed back. Well, we'll be sitting at a bill signing. So lots going to happen in these next 28 days. Let's see. We have a resolution. Chair of the Veteran Caucus.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, I rise to commemorate 5 warriors in the Maryland National Guard. The Maryland National Guard's best warrior competition is a multi-day marathon of mental and physical trials, pushing elite service members to their limits. The competition serves as a crucible designed to identify the Guard's top soldiers and NCOs, reflecting their commitment to excellence, tactical proficiency, and resilience. The Best Warriors competition is open to enlisted, non-commissioned, and commissioned officers of both the Maryland Air and National Guard, and Army National Guard, I should say. Let us give a warm welcome to these warriors and their commitment to excellence and their service to Maryland and our country.
And we have a resolution. The clerk will read the resolution in full.
Be it hereby known to all, the Senate of Maryland offers its sincerest congratulations to the Maryland Air National Guard honorees in recognition of achieving awards which exemplify the Air Force core values, and the highest standards of excellence, the entire membership extends its best wishes on this memorable occasion and directs this resolution be presented on this 11th day of March, 2025.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. President,
Has everyone recorded their vote? If so, recognizing the Chair of the Veterans Caucus.
Yes, and Mr. President, I want to call out the names of the officers. We've got Captain Alexis Ayo, Company Grade Officer of the Year. Airman First Class Brandon T. Diffenbach, Airman of the Year. Staff Sergeant Derek M. Herbert, Non-Commissioned Officer of the Year. And Master Sergeant Benjamin C. Koloff, Senior Non-Commissioned Officer of the Year. And Master Sergeant Robin L. Primer, First Sergeant of the Year.
Excellent, thank you. And the clerk will take the call. To the Warriors of the Maryland Air National Guard honorees, congratulations on your phenomenal efforts at the Air Force core, demonstrating the Air Force core values and highest standards of excellence. We deeply appreciate your work for Maryland and for the country. Thank you, thank you, thank you. We thank you all so much for being here. We're going to do a quick picture as well. We have the senator from District 7, who's one of our guardsmen, air guardsmen, who is has a few remarks once we take the picture. Excellent. Thank you all. And we're going to recognize the senator from District 7.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, again, these are the these are the Airmen of the Year for Maryland Air National Guard, which I'm proud to represent at Martin State Airport. I'm also, as I always say, I'm honored to be a senator, but I'm proud to be a member of the Air National Guard. These are my fellow airmen that I serve with. In fact, Captain Io and I were in Poland earlier this year. Chief Price was my former chief. I'm proud to serve with him. But I just want to say these men and women do an incredible job, and they're fighting very hard. Our general and our TAG are doing their best. As you know, our National Guard's Air National Guard's possibly we're losing our 810s. We're still fighting for a flying mission. They're doing their best, but these men and women are the ones that every year, you know, it's a competition, as the senator said. They're the best of the best. They go out every year, they compete, and we honor them in December. They won it. I just want to congratulate each and every one of you. It's, you know, we all are proud of the districts we represent. Our constituents are the best. We always say they're the best, but for me, it's one of the best parts of my district is representing the Maryland Air National Guard. So thank you for being here.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you for that. Thank you for that reflection. And we thank General Burkhead, of course, for being here. We're always so thankful that you can join us. Please make sure to tell Woody that he's doing a good job. That's yeah, please. All right. Excellent, excellent. All right, let's see, any introductions today? Not a one. Oh, yep, recognize the senator from Howard and Montgomery County.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Colleagues, it's my pleasure to introduce the Doctor of the Day. Dr. Prakasa is a highly respected, board-certified internist with medical training from Kilpack Medical College in India. She honed her skills through an internship at Madras Medical College and a residency at Howard University Hospital in Washington, D.C. She has decades of experience and a reputation for excellence, a true leader in her field, and I'm very proud to have her representing District 9 today. Let's give her a warm welcome.
Welcome. Thank you for your service. Thank you. All right, any further introductions? If not, let's go ahead and jump into it. So be considered the reading of the journal from the prior legislative day. We have a lot of work today. We'll see how much we can get through. So we're just going to plug along. We're going to start with the Finance Committee. So this is report number 15. Clerk will read the first bill.
Senate Bill 49, Senator Guile, Consumer Protection, Automatic Renewals, favorable with 2 amendments.
Recognizing the bill sponsor is the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate Bill 49, as amended, establishes a regulatory framework to govern automatic renewals between a consumer and a seller in which a paid subscription or purchasing agreement is automatically renewed for a subsequent term and requires that the seller allow a consumer to terminate an automatic renewal in a simple, cost-effective, and widely available mechanism as specified. The bill does not apply to certain entities that are already subject to regulation by specified federal and state entities. A violation of the bill is an unfair, abusive, or deceptive trade practice under the Maryland Consumer Protection Act, and violators are generally subject to the civil penalty provisions, but not subject to a private right of action for damages or the criminal penalty provisions under the Maryland Consumer Protection Act. Amendment 1 is technical. Amendment 2, among other changes, alters the definition of automatic renewal as described above to more clearly reflect intent, outlines conditions that must be met in order to automatically charge a consumer's credit card, further clarifies that the Act does not authorize a private right of action, and delays the effective date from October 1st, 2025 until June 1st, 2026. There is no fiscal impact. The bill passed unanimously from committee. I move the amendments and the adoption of the favorable committee report.
Floor leader moves to the adoption of the 2 committee amendments and the favorable committee report. On the amendments, any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the 2 committee amendments are adopted. Question now on the amended report. Any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the amended report is adopted. Are there any further amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 49 is hereby ordered printed for third reading. Clerk will read the next bill.
Senate Bill 305, Senator Bidel, Financial Institutions Activity Virtual Currency Kiosk Registration Regulation, favorable 2 amendments.
Recognizing the bill sponsor as the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. We learned this year about an issue that happens at these machines that, and particularly it's machines that are programmed to be ATMs and cryptocurrency, where people actually get scammed. In the case of the individual that was one of the senator from District 11, an attorney lost $3,500 in this scam. So what this bill does is it sets up regulatory framework for virtual kiosk operators, and we've worked closely with the Commissioner of Financial Regulation. And a virtual currency kiosk must be standalone. It can't say ATM. It has to say Bitcoin or cryptocurrency. You can use cash, credit card, or debit card to purchase virtual currency. And beginning January 1, 2026, an operator must register each of its virtual currency kiosks with the Commissioner of Financial Regulation, including the location of the kiosk, and display certain disclosures on the screen before the transaction. Amendment number 1 is technical. Amendment 2 requires the Commissioner of Financial Regulation to adopt various regulations to implement the Act, adds additional safeguards for consumers such as live customer service and refunds of fees on verified fraudulent transactions, and adds a prohibition against virtual currency services being offered at traditional ATMs. I move the amendments and the adoption of the favorable committee report.
Floor leader moves to the adoption of the 2 committee amendments and the favorable committee report. It's a brave new world out there. This is a bill in Congress, I think, today on this. All right, on the 2 committee amendments, any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the 2 committee amendments are adopted. Question now on the amended report. Any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the amended report is adopted. Are there any further amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 305 is hereby ordered printed for third reading. Clerk will read the next bill.
Senate Bill 357, Senator Guile, Prescription Drug Affordability Board, Authority for Upper Payment Limits, Lowering Prescription Drug Costs for All Mail-Unders Now Act, favorable 2 amendments.
Recognizing the bill sponsor as the floor leader.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Colleagues, the skyrocketing cost of prescription drugs is a critical concern for the health and well-being of Marylanders across the state. These costs often serve as a barrier to essential care, forcing many of our families and neighbors to choose between filling prescriptions and filling their fridge. Not only does this issue impact the economic stability of our state residents, but it threatens the efficacy of our broader healthcare system as well. Senate Bill 357 requires a Prescription Drug Affordability Board to determine whether it is in the best interests of the state to set upper payment limits for purchases and payer reimbursements for prescription drug products in the state that, in the board's determination, have led or will lead to an affordability challenge in the state. The Prescription Drug Affordability Board, or PDAB, must take several things into consideration in making this determination. But if PDAB does make the determination, PDAB must establish a process in consultation with the Stakeholder Council and then set upper payment limits in accordance with the established process. before setting upper payment limits for all purchases and payer reimbursements in the state, except those specifically excluded. PDAB must set upper payment limits on 2 prescription drug products in accordance with the action plan approved by the Legislative Policy Committee, and those upper payment limits must then be in effect for 1 year. Amendment 1 is technical. Amendment 2 adds members to the Stakeholder Council, adds extensive reporting requirements in the event PDAB sets a limit that is applicable to purchases and payer reimbursements in the state, requires PDAB to take into consideration the rare disease community when setting a limit, gives authority to Medicaid to approve limits that may conflict with federal programs or increase its costs, and excludes certain federal entities and programs from the application of upper payment limits. I move the amendments and the adoption of the favorable committee report.
Floor leader moves for the adoption of the 2 committee amendments and the favorable committee report. On the amendments, any discussion? Recognize the senator from District 6 on the amendments.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to lay over the bill just for add maybe a couple of more amendments we're looking at right now.
All right, the senator moves to lay over the bill. It's an automatic, motion is automatic. The bill and the amendments will lie over under the rule. Clerk will read the next bill.
Senate Bill 571, Anne Arundel County Senators, Anne Arundel County, Class A off-sale and Class D off-sale licenses, population ratio quota, favorable with 1 amendment.
Recognize the senator from Anne Arundel as the floor leader.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Senate Bill 571 limits the issuance of Class A off-sale and Class D off-sale licenses in certain assessment districts of Anne Arundel County based on a population ratio quota of 1 license for every 3,500 individuals. Amendment 1 excludes a certain applicant from the population ratio quota, authorizes the board to use population estimates prepared by the Anne Arundel County Office of Planning and Zoning, and sunsets the bill on December 31st, 2028. There is no fiscal impact. There is a letter of support from the Anne Arundel County Senate delegation. I move the amendments and adoption of the favorable committee report.
Floor leader moves for the adoption of the 1 committee amendment and the favorable committee report. On the amendment, any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the 1 committee amendment is adopted. Question now on the amended report. Any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the amended report is adopted. Are there any further amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 571 is hereby ordered printed for 3rd reading. Clerk will read the next bill.
Senate Bill 652, Senator Jennings, local government, local personnel, leave with pay, favorable 2 amendments.
Recognize the minority whip as the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate Bill 652 establishes that specified employees of a county or municipal government may be entitled to disaster service leave with pay. Eligible employees could use up to 15 days of disaster leave in any 12-month period only after obtaining approval from their local governmental unit, whether county or town. The bill also authorizes local government employers, to provide leave with pay for other purposes such as jury service, uniform services, training, or court testimony. The amendment number 1 is technical. Amendment number 2 clarifies that a governmental unit may, but is not required to provide disaster leave with pay to employees. This is enabling legislation. I move the amendments and the adoption of the favorable committee report.
Floor leader moves to the adoption of the 2 committee amendments and the favorable committee report. On the amendments, any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the 2 committee amendments are adopted. Question now on the amended report. Any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the amended report is adopted. Are there any further amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 652 is hereby ordered printed for 3rd reading. Clerk will read the next bill.
Senate Bill 844, Senator Hershey, Maryland Self-Service Storage Act, sale of personal property and satisfaction of lien, notice requirements, favorable 1 amendment.
Recognize the bill sponsors, the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate Bill 844 is a minor correction to the bill we passed last year and requires a self-service storage facility operator to provide an occupant with notice at least 10 days before conducting a lien sale of personal property authorized under the Maryland Self-Service Storage Act. The operator must notify the occupant of the time, place, and terms of the sale by hand delivery, verified mail, or electronic mail at the occupant's last known address. If an operator notifies the occupant via email and does not receive a response at least 5 days before the sale, the operator must promptly send a second notice to the occupant by verified mail to the occupant's last known postal address. Amendment number 1 adds a sponsor to the bill. There is no fiscal impact. There is no opposition at the committee hearing. I move the amendment and the adoption of the favorable committee report.
Floor leader moves for the adoption of the one committee amendment and the favorable committee report. Recognizing the senator from District 9.
Mr. President, I just haven't had a chance to look at the amendment. We lay this over under the rule?
Senator's motion is automatic. The bill and the amendment will lie over under the
The
rule.
amendment adds a sponsor.
Taking a look at the amendment. All right, let's go to the next calendar. This is calendar 16. Clerk will read the first bill.
Senate Bill 227, Chair, Finance Committee, Workers' Compensation, Payment from Uninsured Employers Fund, Revisions, favorable with 2 amendments.
Recognize the senator from Montgomery County as the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate Bill 227 is a departmental bill that modifies the process by which an employee or dependents of an employee may apply to and receive payment from the Uninsured Employers Fund in a workers' compensation action. Amendment 1 is technical. Amendment 2 strikes a particular provision and replaces it with an authorization by the Workers' Compensation Commission to order a certain offset or credit against an award. The committee passed the bill unanimously. I move the amendments and the adoption of the favorable committee report.
Floor leader moves for the adoption of the 2 committee amendments and the favorable committee report. On the amendments, any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the 2 committee amendments are adopted. Question now on the amended report. Any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the amended report is adopted. Are there any further amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 227 is hereby ordered printed for third reading. Clerk will read the next bill.
Senate Bill 277, Senator Simonaire, Health Equality for Service Members Act, favorable 2 amendments.
All right, recognize the senator from Anne Arundel as the floor leader.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Senate Bill 277 generally establishes uniform definitions related to the military and the general provisions, health occupations, housing and community development, and state government articles, primarily by reference to definitions in the U.S. Code. The majority of the changes are stylistic or technical. Substantive changes generally make certain provisions applicable to all members of the uniformed services, thereby expanding eligibility for certain privileges and benefits to include members of the Public Health Service or the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. Examples of privileges and benefits extended under the bill include expedited health occupations licensing, fee exemptions for vital records, and continued eligibility for certain waiver programs. Amendment 1 is technical. Amendment 2 makes additional clarifying technical and stylistic changes. There is no fiscal impact. I move the amendments and the adoption of the favorable committee report.
Floor leader moves to the adoption of the 2 committee amendments and the favorable committee report. On the amendments, any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the 2 committee amendments are adopted. Question now is on the amended report. Any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the amended report is adopted. Are there any further amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 277 is hereby ordered printed for third reading. Clerk will read the next bill.
Senate Bill 306, Senator Bidel, Workers' Compensation, Prescription Drug and Pharmaceutical Services, Reimbursement, favorable 2 amendments.
Recognizing Chair of the Committee is the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate Bill 306 requires the Workmen's Compensation Commission to regulate fees and other charges for the reimbursement of prescription drugs and pharmaceutical services provided through Workmen's Compensation System. Any such reimbursement must be limited to an index or indexes based on acquisition cost and may include reasonable dispensing fees. Amendment 1 is technical. Amendment 2 requires the Commission to regulate fees by September 1st, 2026, limits the application of the bill to pharmacies, authorizes the Commission to increase or decrease by a certain percentage the reimbursement limits set by an index, clarifies that the bill does not impact the ability of a carrier or employer to contract with a PBM, pharmacy network, or dispensing providers for different rates, and requires that the Prescription Drug Affordability Board to conduct a certain study. I move the amendments and the adoption of the favorable committee report.
Floor leader moves to the adoption of the 2 committee amendments and the favorable committee report. Recognize the senator from District 7.
Thank you, Mr. President. I've had some first responders reach out to me with questions, and I'm trying to learn a little more about it. Can we special order this for one day?
Senators move to special order the bill. Any objections?
No objection. I'll have a conversation with the senator. Thank you.
All right. Senators move to special order. Any
Thanks.
objections? Without objection, so ordered. Clerk will read the next bill.
Senate Bill 589, Senator Augustine, Opioid Restitution Fund, Interactive Dashboard, favorable with 2 amendments.
Recognizing Senator from the 28th District as the floor leader.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, Senate Bill 589 is one of several opioid-related bills going through the system this year in regards to the restitution fund. Over 22,000 Marylanders have passed away over the last 20 years due to opioid abuse. There is some concern among our local counties that the funds are not flowing properly. So this bill, Senate Bill 589, creates a dashboard to develop and maintain an interactive opioid restitution fund tracking system to share prescription opioid-related settlement amount with the public. So this is a very technical bill. Therefore, Amendment 1 is technical. Amendment 2 requires the dashboard to include certain provisions related to municipalities. If they have a really wonderful reporting system, they don't have to report to this dashboard. The bill passed the committee unanimously. Mr. President, I move the amendment and the adoption of the favorable committee report.
Floor leader moves for the adoption of the 2 committee amendments and the favorable committee report. On the amendments, any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the 2 committee amendments are adopted. Question now is on the amended report. Any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the amended report is adopted. Are there any further amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 589 is hereby ordered printed for third reading. Clerk, read the next bill.
Senate Bill 695, Senator Bidel, Labor and Employment Uninsured Employers Fund Board Membership and Reservations, favorable.
Recognizing Chair of Finance as the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. I wasn't highlighted on the list. Give me a second. Senate Bill 695 actually adds some members to the Uninsured Employers Fund Board. If we don't do something, this fund's going to be insolvent in the next 18 months. So it adds some members, and then add members with experience as officers or employees of a property and casualty insurance company, or experience in the fields of accounting or finance, and experience as a policyholder of workman's compensation. The bill also requires, instead of authorizes, the board to establish reserves to meet potential losses of the fund. There are no amendments, and I move the adoption of the favorable committee report.
All right, floor leaders move for the adoption of the favorable committee report. The stock market keeps going in the same direction. It might not be 18 months. It might be faster than that. So, all right, on the report, any further discussion? Any down 500 today? All right, on the report, any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the favorable committee report is adopted. Are there any amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 695 is hereby ordered printed for third reading. Clerk will read the next bill.
Senate Bill 830, Senator Hayes, Workmen's Compensation Claims Application Form Authorization for Release of Information, favorable with 2 amendments.
Recognized Vice Chair of Finance as the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate Bill 830 expands the list of entities authorized to receive certain information related to a workers' compensation claim to include uninsured employers fund, the subsequent injury fund, and their agents. The bill also expands the information that must be authorized to be shared with these and other entities involved in workers' compensation claims. Amendment 1 is technical. Amendment number 2 confirms changes to subsequent sections that address the submission of a claim application form. There's no fiscal impact. There was no opposition at the committee hearing. I move the amendments and adoption of favorable committee report.
Floor leader moves for the adoption of the 2 committee amendments and the favorable committee report. On the amendments, any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the 2 committee amendments are adopted. Question now is on the amended report. Any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the amended report is adopted. Are there any further amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 830 is hereby ordered printed for third reading. Is that the last on that? It is. All right, let's go to calendar 17, or report 17. Clerk, read the first bill.
Senate Bill 60, Senator Augustine, Maryland Medical Assistance Program and Health Insurance Requirement for Coverage for Calcium Score Testing, favorable 2 amendments.
Recognizing the senator from Baltimore County as the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. As amended, Senate Bill 60 requires an insurer, a nonprofit health service plan, and a health maintenance organization, as well as Medicaid, to cover calcium score testing in accordance with the most recent guidelines issued by the American College of Cardiology that expands the scope of preventative care services for the benefit of consumers. This bill takes effect January 2026 and applies to all policy, contracts, and health benefit plans issued, delivered, or renewed in the state or on or after that date. Amendment number 1 is technical. Amendment number 2 alters the standard under which an insurer or Medicaid must cover calcium score testing as described. I move the amendments and the adoption of the favorable committee report.
Floor leader moves to the adoption of the 2 committee amendments and the favorable committee report. On the amendments, any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the 2 committee amendments are adopted. Question now is on the amended report. Any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the amended report is adopted. Are there any further amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 60 is hereby ordered printed for 3rd reading. Clerk, read the next bill.
Senate Bill 229, Chair, Finance Committee, Health Services Cost Review, Commission User Fee Assessment, Repeal of Sunset, favorable.
Recognizing Vice Chair is the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate Bill 229 is a departmental bill that repeals the June 30th, 2025 termination date of the formula used by the Health Services Cost Review Commission to determine the maximum amount of user fees that may be assessed to support the Commission's activities. There are no amendments. I move the adoption of a favorable committee report.
Floor leader moves for the adoption of the favorable committee report. On the report, any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the favorable committee report is adopted. Are there any amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 229 is hereby ordered printed for 3rd reading. Clerk will read the next bill.
Senate Bill 379, Senator M. Washington, State Board of Social Work Examiners, Membership and Examination Requirements, favorable of 2 amendments.
Recognizing Chair of the Committee is the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. You may remember that there has been a committee looking at this exam for the social workers, the licensing exam. And so this bill, Senate Bill 379, as amended, extends the termination date of the work group on social worker requirements for licensure and requires the work group to report on modifications to the license exam, the implementation of additional accommodation for test takers, the availability of exam preparation materials, and the context of those changes, the continuation and use of the license exam for bachelor and master social worker licenses. Amendment 1 is technical. Amendment 2 strikes the bill as introduced and substitute the provisions described. I move the amendments and the adoption of the favorable committee report.
Floor leader moves for the adoption of the 2 committee amendments and the favorable committee report. On the amendments, Chair recognizes the bill sponsor.
Thank you very much. Would the floor leader please stand for a few questions?
Absolutely.
Senator may proceed.
Thank you so much. And I appreciate all the work that this committee has done since 2003 on this issue, addressing how we're going to license social workers in Maryland and addressing the workforce issues and shortages. And the floor leader did mention the work group. So I was just wondering how many times did the work group not meet? Did the work group meet and make recommendations?
The work group made a recommendation, but it was not consensus. The people that represented the AWSB on the work group did not agree with the recommendation. So it's really good on a big issue like this if we can really collaborate and come to consensus.
Oh, Mr. President, I wasn't going to raise this issue, but the commission actually hired, an outside consultant to, run an assessment, of where everyone stood, and it says that the 3 recommendations, that were made, 90% of the 22 members of the commission made that recommendation. I was just wondering, what were those 3 recommendations? And yeah, it was just
I believe the recommendations from the 90% or the 80% that you're referring to were to go ahead and have people be licensed as social workers without taking an exam. And the committee felt very strongly that would be the only professional group in the occupations article that would not take an exam to be certified. Be the only professional group.
Thank you. Just a couple more, just to understand the amendment. So the committee, it looks like the work group met 17 times, and they provided the committee with an interim report and a final report. And so it looks like the committee amendment repeats the initial bill, which was Senate Bill 879, to create the work group. Could you explain the amendments? And so of the things that the work group was to do, are there things that are undone in the initial round, and that's why the committee is extending it for 2 years?
Thank you for the question, Senator. There have been changes. The AWSB, which is the only national exam that's used for the compact that I think we've already passed, is making changes on the exam. As I noted in the amendments, they are actually reducing the number of responses on multiple choice from 4 to 3. They are allowing people to, like, if they take the test and maybe they pass some modules and not others, they only have to retake those modules. They're also going to provide more help for people both before they take the exam and if they fail the exam. And so the committee would like to see what the results are from these changes to have more people be positively, pass the exam and be able to be licensed social workers.
And thank you, Mr. President. I think it is important that they're making those exams, but the amendments seem to exclusively apply to the Association of Social Work Boards. Were there any other amendments that the committee considered except those from the ASWB?
Were there any other amendments? I don't believe so. Were there any other amendments at the committee? There were. There were additional members, as you know, Senator, from you. There were additional amendments that you brought, but it still would have continued to have people not required to take the exam. So we considered those and did not choose to pass those.
And that's absolutely fair. I was just trying to clarify and understand the source of the amendment, and then the extension of the work, which is an important thing. So thank you so much. My questions have been answered. Thank you.
Okay. All right, on the amendments, any further discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the 2 committee amendments are adopted. Question now is on the amended report. Any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the amended report is adopted. Are there any further amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 379 is hereby ordered printed for 3rd reading. Clerk will read the next bill.
Senate Bill 981, Senator Hershey, Hospitals, Financial Assistance, and Collection of Debts Policies, favorable with 2 amendments.
Recognize the bill sponsor as the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate Bill 981 is a continuation of previous policy and alters hospital financial assistance and collection of debt policies, including requiring a hospital to reduce patients' out-of-pocket expenses for medically necessary care by a specified percentage based on the patient's family income. The bill prohibits a hospital from filing a civil action to collect debt against a patient under specified circumstances and increases the number of days from 180 to 240 before interest payments on medical debt may be assessed or a hospital is authorized to take civil action to collect the debt. The bill alters notification requirements for hospital financial assistance policies and alters the monthly payment amount for which an income-based payment plan for medical debt. Amendment number 1 is technical and adds all committee members as co-sponsors. Amendment number 2 provides that a contract that is related to an obligation to pay consumer debt that arises from hospital services between a consumer and a hospital is not subject to the 12-year statute of limitations provided under current law on current actions, requires a hospital to obtain documentation ensuring that a patient acknowledges receipt of the hospital's financial assistance policy before discharge, and strikes language that would have authorized the hospital to include a professional fee under its debt collection policies. I move the amendment and the adoption of the favorable committee report.
Floor leader moves to the adoption of the 2 committee amendments and the favorable committee report. On the amendments, any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the 2 committee amendments are adopted. Question now is on the amended report. Any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the amended report is adopted. Are there any further amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 981 is hereby ordered printed for 3rd reading. All right, let's go to Finance Report number 18. Clerk will read the first bill.
Senate Bill 279, Senator Simon Nair, Employment Insurance Equality for Service Members Act, favorable 2 amendments.
Recognize the senator from the 37th as the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate Bill 279 establishes uniform definitions in the state government article related to military designations by reference to definitions in the U.S. Code. throughout several articles in the Maryland Code. In addition, some changes broadly make service members and those related eligible for some state benefits, such as exemption from license renewal fees. Amendment 1 is technical. Amendment 2 restores 2 deleted references to honorably discharged veterans and adds an additional catch-all definition for veteran in the general provisions article. There's no fiscal impact. There was no opposition at the committee hearing. I move the amendments and the adoption of the favorable committee report.
Floor leader moves for the adoption of the 2 committee amendments and the favorable committee report. On the amendments, any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the 2 committee amendments are adopted. Question now on the amended report. Any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the amended report is adopted. Are there any further amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 279 is hereby ordered printed for 3rd reading. Clerk will read the next bill.
Senate Bill 544, Senator Bailey, food establishments, portable chemical toilets, favorable.
All right. Recognizing the senator from Montgomery County as the floor leader.
Yes, thank you for that, Mr. President. Good morning again, colleagues. Clearly, I drew the short straw in committee, and as such, I present the floor report for Senate Bill 544, food establishments, portable chemical toilets, better known as porta potties. Colleagues, clearly, porta potties are the unsung heroes of music festivals, sporting events, construction sites, and now agritourism. They can be a sanctuary in desperate times, but a person may not enter knowing whether it will be a pristine oasis or a brutal crime scene. Therefore, we have the bill before you. Colleagues, over the past decade, we have, in fact, been providing new opportunities for business in our agricultural communities throughout the state. We're allowing wineries, breweries, agricultural festivals, and as a consequence, we need to ensure we are providing sanitary bathroom conditions for these facilities. Senate Bill 544 allows businesses that conduct agritourism, Class 4 limited wineries, and Class 8 farm breweries with food establishments to comply with the requirement to have a convenient lavatory by providing a portable chemical toilet. The toilet must be supplied with soap, water, and a method to dry hands, and most importantly, kept in sanitary condition and be properly ventilated. This will replace the myriad of local and confusing standards that exist at the moment. Colleagues, there are no amendments, there is no fiscal impact, and I move the adoption of the favorable committee report, and I plead with you, no questions, please.
All right, floor leader moves to the adoption of the favorable committee report. Recognizing the senator from Baltimore County.
I do have a question. And I'm looking at page 2, line 3 of the bill, and the floor leader spoke to this. It's supplied with soap, water, towels, or other approved hand drying devices. With this, and this is current law, what it doesn't say is toilet tissue. So I've been in these things before, and I'm just curious if this came up in conversation.
It did not, but clearly it makes it clear to all of us that toilet tissue is a blessing, not a guarantee.
I thought you were going to say that it would be under the sanitary conditions.
But I would proffer that based on the requirement for the sanitary conditions, that toilet tissue is assumed to be part of that.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for your question, I think.
All right. Members, send it to Maryland. Let's make sure we're, yeah.
I do have a question, Mr. President.
Okay, recognize the senator from District 9 has a question.
Does the water have to be inside the porta potty, or are those things that are like outside where there's a hand washing station okay?
It would be perfectly acceptable. And in fact, the reality is most of these facilities are very well constructed. They're built on platforms. It's not the typical porta potty that you would find usually at a construction site, far more sophisticated than that. And yes, absolutely.
All right, further questions? Recognize Senator from District 28.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. President.
Senator may proceed.
Floor Leader. Thank you for that presentation, Mr. Floor Leader. It was very well done, and you made very light of a very serious issue. I have a question for you. Did the Maryland Department of Health and/or Environment submit recommended criteria for the location of these facilities?
Yes, thank you for your question. As you're well aware, in the committee, the Maryland Department of Health weighed in on the legislation.
Okay, and what are some of those things they suggest, like the location of these facilities in reference to drinking water supply, wells, streams?
Thank you for that, and I know that the good senator raised questions in committee about the vicinity in which one of these might be located, and if somehow they might be somewhere that they might possibly impact drinking water. And I did considerable research since that was raised, and I could not find one single instance, either in Maryland, across the country, or globally, where there was any report of a porta potty somehow having caused any problems or pollution of a drinking water source other than one instance in England where the porta potty company had directly dumped the porta potties into a local river source. Other than that, there is absolutely no record whatsoever that I could glean related to there ever having been contamination. The porta potties are in fact sealed units, and no reports at all of there having been any source of contamination.
That's a wonderful answer, Mr. Floor Leader, but you didn't answer my question. My direct question was, did the Maryland Department of Health and/or Environment make recommendations as far as the location of these porta potties on the land?
They made recommendations, and the committee chose not to adopt.
What were some of those recommendations they made, like distancing from wells, springs, and streams?
That I don't recall.
Well, I do. It's like 200 feet, and from wells and drinking waters. And one of the things with being in a very rural county, I understand a lot of this. In Charles County, a lot of our facilities, a lot of our homes and businesses are on well and septic. And there's a health rules there saying that well must be X number of feet from a septic system. You can't put them next to each other. You can't really co-locate. So in a home, if you have the well in the front of the house, the septic has to be in the backyard. And so the health department came in with this requirement, held with the Maryland Department of Health and Department of Environment, saying that 200 feet. It seemed a little excessive, and we had that discussion. So why would the committee not consider our health department and environment department when they are concerned about public health and the sanctity of drinking water? Why did we not consider those requirements?
And I appreciate the question. The health department came in with quite a laundry list of recommendations, and I think it was the conclusion of the majority of the committee that that laundry list was once again an agency looking to come in and do their best to ensure the failure of a particular bill rather than opining on individual merits and parts of it. So I think this was part of that. The committee felt that these concerns were misplaced, and as such, the committee passed the bill as introduced with confidence, once again, that in light of the fact that the health department did not document one single instance where there has ever been a causal relationship between a porta potty and pollution of drinking water.
Okay, understood. Thank you. So there were discussions in the committee because we moved through the voting session really fast, and we followed procedural rules that we will consider certain amendments to this bill, taken into consideration, and make it a floor amendment. So, Mr. President, I'd love to make a motion to lay this bill over. And some amendments are in drafting right now, and they were not ready this morning. So, Mr. President, if I could lay this bill over and run the amendment which we talked about in committee voting session with the chair and the floor leader.
Mr. President,
Senator, layover would not be in
Special
order
order?
because there are no amendments currently to the bill. So the senator could move to special order the bill.
I move to special order the bill.
The appropriate time tomorrow?
For tomorrow, yes, Mr. President.
No
Any
objection,
objections?
Mr. President.
All right, without objection, the bill will be special ordered to the appropriate time tomorrow.
Thank you.
Clerk will read the next bill.
Senate Bill 641, Senator Gallion, health insurance required coverage, hearing aids, favorable to amendments.
Recognize the senator from Carroll County as the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I found the explanation of the previous bill to just be spectacular. But for many people who suffer with hearing loss, they would not have been able to hear that fantastic explanation without the benefit of a hearing aid. And Senate Bill 641, as amended, alters an existing health insurance mandate that regards the coverage of hearing aids for adults to require, if the hearing aids are ordered, fitted, and dispensed by a licensed hearing aid dispenser, to require coverage. Currently, under current law, they're only required if it's a licensed audiologist. So this allows for a licensed hearing aid dispenser to fit and order and dispense these and have it covered by insurance. There are two amendments. One amendment was technical. Second amendment removes from the bill provisions relating to requiring the coverage for children, and there is no fiscal impact, no opposition, and I move the amendments and the adoption of the favorable committee report.
Floor leader moves to the adoption of the two committee amendments and the favorable committee report. On the amendments, any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the two committee amendments are adopted. Question now on the amended report. Any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the amended report is adopted. Are there any amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 641 is hereby ordered printed for third reading. We were just advised that there is mowing on the state happening right now, and so the fumes are from the lawn mowers apparently. So nothing is burning, but yeah, that's what we have been instructed. So might be a bill about it in the future, I suspect. All right, clerk will read the next bill.
Senate Bill 776, Senator Bidel, work group to study the rise in adverse decisions in the state healthcare system, establishment, favorable with one amendment.
Recognizing chair of the committee is the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate Bill 776 establishes a work group to study the documented rise in adverse decisions in the state healthcare system. The work group's duties include reviewing existing state adverse decision reporting requirements for all payers in the state, and making recommendations to improve reporting on adverse decision, and developing strategies for and making recommendations to reduce the number of adverse decisions. By December 1st, 2025, the work group must report its findings and recommendations, and it terminates on June 30th, 2026. The amendment adds members to the work group, is clarifying and alters staffing for the work group. There was no opposition at the committee. I move the amendment and the adoption of the favorable committee report.
Floor leader moves to the adoption of the one committee amendment and the favorable committee report. On the amendment, any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the one committee amendment is adopted. Question now on the amended report. Any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the amended report is adopted. Are there any further amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 776 is hereby ordered printed for third reading. All right, I think it's the last one from Finance, report number 19. Clerk will read the first bill.
Senate Bill 374, Senator Bidel, Health Insurance, Cancer Screening for Professional Firefighters, Required Coverage, James Jimmy Malone Act, favorable with 2 amendments.
Recognize the chair of the committee is the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. As we've all heard, the incidence of cancer in firefighters is higher than any other occupation that we currently hear about. And so Senate Bill 374 provides a cancer screening coverage for firefighters. As amended, counties that are self-insured must provide its firefighters coverage for preventive cancer screenings in accordance with specified guidelines, that would be the IAFF guidelines, and are prohibited from imposing co-payments or deductible requirements. Instead of providing coverage, counties may provide no-cost annual exams that include cancer screening or apply for a grant from the Innovative Cancer Screening Program to pay for the screening technologies, including an early detection blood test. Amendment 1 is technical and alters the title. Amendment 2 strikes an insurance mandate and alters the bill as just described and requires counties to collect relevant data on their firefighters and report to the Maryland Healthcare Commission, who then must conduct a health insurance mandate study. There was no opposition at the committee hearing. I move the amendments and the adoption of the favorable committee report.
Floor leader moves to the adoption of the 2 committee amendments and the favorable committee report. On the amendments, any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the 2 committee amendments are adopted. Question now is on the amended report. Any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the amended report is adopted. Are there any further amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 374 is hereby ordered printed for third reading. Clerk, read the next bill.
Senate Bill 773, Senator Hershey, Health Benefits Plan, Calculation of Cost-Sharing Contribution Requirements, favorable with 2 amendments.
Recognize the bill sponsor as the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate Bill 773 requires an administrator, a carrier, and pharmacy benefit manager when calculating an enrollee's contribution to an applicable cost-sharing requirement, such as a deductible, to include any payments, including copay assistance, made by, on, or behalf of the enrollee. Administrators, carriers, and PBMs may not set, alter, implement, or condition the terms of a health plan coverage based on information about the availability or amount of financial or product assistance for a prescription drug. The bill also applies to annual limitation on cost sharing under the Affordable Care Act to all plans offered or insured by an administrator or carrier in the state. The 2 amendments are technical, apply the common definition of carrier and the common reference to high deductible plans, strike unnecessary language, require third parties providing financial assistance for a prescription drug to provide specified notice to enrollees, and prohibiting the same third parties from conditioning the assistance on enrolling in specified plans. I move the amendments and adoption of the favorable committee report.
Floor leader moves to the adoption of the 2 committee amendments and the favorable committee report. On the amendments, any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the 2 committee amendments are adopted. Question now on the amended report. Any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the amended report is adopted. Are there any further amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 773 is hereby ordered printed for third reading. Clerk, read the next bill.
Senate Bill 902, Senator Augustine, Health Insurance, Access to Non-Participating Providers, Referrals, Additional Assistance, and Coverage, favorable with 2 amendments.
Recognize the senator from the 28th District as the floor leader.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, the sponsor's testimony on this bill was very interesting. Part of it says that individuals who need mental health services, substance abuse services are 10.6 times more likely to have to go out of network to provide those services than folks who need surgical medical care. 10.6 times more likely have to go out of network. So this bill, Senate Bill 902, requires providers to cover mental health or substance use disorder payments for non-participating providers at the same rate as in-network. Wonderful bill. Amendment 1 is technical. Amendment 2 clarifies certain circumstances under which a carrier is required to make a referral. As amended, there are no opposition to this bill. Mr. President, I move for the amendments and adoption of the favorable committee report.
Floor leader moves for the adoption of the 2 committee amendments and the favorable committee report. On the amendments, any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the 2 committee amendments are adopted. Question now is on the amended report. Any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the amended report is adopted. Are there any further amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 902 is hereby ordered printed for third reading. Clerk will read the next bill.
Senate Bill 956, Senator West, Health Insurance Medicare Supplement Policies Broker Commission, favorable with 2 amendments.
Recognize the senator from Caroline County as the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate Bill 956 requires a carrier to pay the same commission rates to an insurance provider for the sale of a Medicare supplement policy, regardless if the policy is sold during open enrollment, as an underwriting policy, or the period of time surrounding an individual's birthday. The 2 amendments are technical, clarifying, and alter the bill as just described. There was no opposition at the committee hearing. I move the amendments and the adoption of the favorable committee report.
Floor leader moves to the adoption of the 2 committee amendments and the favorable committee report. Recognize the President Pro Tem.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm very concerned about what's happening with Medicare. I would just ask that the bill lie over under the rule.
Senator's motion is in order. The bill and the amendments will lay over under the rule. All right, let's shift over to Education, Energy, and the Environment. This is report number 12. Report number 12. Clerk will read the first bill.
Senate Bill 337, Senator Kagan, Elections, Local Boards of Elections and Boards of Canvassers, Open Meeting Requirements, Local Boards of Election Transparency Act, favorable 2 amendments.
Recognize the bill sponsor as the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, over the last several years, we have worked to make our government agencies and departments much more transparent with live streaming. This is the latest iteration for this year, and it applies to our local boards of elections, our 24 local jurisdictions. There is an amendment that removes the need to live stream the canvassing, so this would just apply the same requirements on their meetings as we have on other departments and agencies. So move adoption of the committee amendments and the favorable committee report.
Floor leader moves to the adoption of the 2 committee amendments and the favorable committee report. On the amendments, any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the 2 committee amendments are adopted. Question now is on the amended report. Any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the amended report is adopted. Are there any further amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 337 is hereby ordered printed for third reading. Clerk will read the next bill.
Senate Bill 352, Senator Saling, Baltimore County Republican Party Central Committee, Elections, favorable.
Recognize the senator from District 10 as the floor leader.
Yeah, colleagues, this bill reduces from 4 to 3 the number of members elected to the Baltimore County Republican Central Committee from each councilman district in Baltimore County. There are no committee amendments. I move the adoption of the favorable committee report.
All right, floor leader moves to the adoption of the favorable committee report. Any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the favorable committee report is adopted. Are there any amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 352 is hereby ordered printed for third reading. Clerk will read the next bill.
Senate Bill 361, Senator Hester, Election Law Influence on a Voter's Voting Decision by Use of Fraud Prohibition, favorable.
Recognize the senator from District 9 as the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, this is a narrowly tailored bill which deals with deepfakes in our elections. The bill alters the definition of fraud to include the use of synthetic media altered with generative artificial intelligence, such as deepfakes, to create a realistic but fundamentally different understanding or impression of a candidate or a recording of a candidate. The bill also adds fraud to the list of acts a person is prohibited from using to willingly and knowingly influence or attempt to influence a voter's voting decision. There's no fiscal note, and the bill passed unanimously. I move the adoption of the favorable committee report.
Floor leader moves to the adoption of the favorable committee report. Recognize the minority whip on the report.
Yeah, just one quick question, if I might ask the
Will the
floor
senator
leader.
yield to a question? Senator may proceed.
I just noticed the addition of by use of fraud. Is that in the context of using AI to perpetrate the fraud, or is that just in the context of fraud in general?
Yes, it is in the context of using artificial intelligence.
So creating some sort of ad that shows Senator Reedy hurting a puppy or something, but that would be a fraudulent image of that would be a fraud.
It has to be fundamentally different than what happened in reality.
And who adjudicates it? Who makes that determination?
Is it the prosecutors? The cases would go directly to the state prosecutor.
Okay, and there would be a court proceeding following that?
Sorry, the state board of It would go to the state board and then the state prosecutor.
So, okay, so I wonder if I'm totally for making sure we make it illegal to use AI to be fraudulent. I'm just curious about the steps that would go. Could I special order this for, I don't know, if we're not having an afternoon session, are we? It's just for tomorrow, and I'd be happy to talk offline. I don't want to do a long floor colloquy, so
Senator's moved a special order bill to the appropriate time tomorrow.
That's fine.
Any objections? All right.
I support the concept for sure. Okay, thank you.
Any objections from the floor? Without objection, the bill will be special ordered to the appropriate time tomorrow. Clerk will read the next bill.
Senate Bill 601, Senator Brooks, Education Dependent Children of Service Members, Advanced Enrollment Procedures, favorable one amendment.
Recognizing the bill sponsor is the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, this bill requires local schools to allow a student, a dependent child of a service member to apply for advanced enrollment in a public school and specify requirements for advanced enrollment procedures. The Secretary of Veterans and Military Family, in consultation with specific entities, must publish and maintain information on A, advanced enrollment procedures, and B, and assistance and services available to service members regarding advanced enrollment. There's one committee amendment. The amendment updates the various definitions regarding the military to conform to the uniform definition of military in other bills this session. It clarifies the policy allowing a dependent child to stay in a certain school is subject to a case-by-case review of the local school system, and that the local school system must prioritize continuity of education in making those determinations, and clarifies that a dependent child using an advanced enrollment is required to have access to all courses and programs for which that child qualifies. The impact is none. I move the adoption of the one committee amendment and the favorable committee report.
Floor leader moves for the adoption of the one committee amendment and the favorable committee report. On the amendment, any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the one committee amendment is adopted. Question now is on the amended report. Any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the amended report is adopted. Are there any further amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 601 is hereby ordered printed for third reading. Clerk, read the next bill.
Senate Bill 615, Senator Kagan, Election Law, Petitions and Ballot Questions, Contents, Plain Language Requirement, and Procedures, favorable of two amendments.
Recognizing the bill sponsor is the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, twice this body has overwhelmingly passed a bill expressing our commitment to simplifying ballot measure questions. When our voters look at gobbledygook and jargon and legalese on the ballot, they're confused and they tend not to vote. And so there's a huge drop-off. When we offer them simplified language, they cast a ballot, they have an opinion, and they want to participate. This bill, this version, is even better than the one that we passed last year. Right? There are 23 states that already have laws, and we pulled from a range of states, California, Hawaii, Idaho, Mississippi, New Jersey, and North Dakota, to come up with kind of best practices. And this makes sure that there is transparency, that there is a public comment period, and that it all gets done early enough that there is time in case there's a legal argument to be discussed, that the ballots can still get printed and sent to our troops and everyone overseas. So there are two amendments. The first is they basically just change the timetable and make sure that there is accountability and transparency. So move the two amendments, committee amendments, and the favorable committee report.
Third year's a charm.
Yes.
All right, floor leader moves to the adoption of the two committee amendments and the favorable committee report. On the amendments, any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the two committee amendments are adopted. Question now is on the amended report. Any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the amended report is adopted. Are there any further amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 615 is hereby ordered printed for third reading. Clerk will read the next bill.
Senate Bill 656, Senator Sidnor, Baltimore County Board of Education, alterations of elected member districts and establishment of redistricting process, favorable.
Recognize the senator from Prince George's as the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, this bill requires, this is a local Baltimore County bill. This bill requires that beginning with the 2034 general election, The members of the Baltimore County Board of Education, currently elected from each of the 7 councilmatic districts in the county, must instead be elected from each of the 7 school board districts established through a specified redistricting process. There's no committee amendments. I move adoption of the favorable committee report.
Floor leader moves for the adoption of the favorable committee report. Any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the favorable committee report is adopted. Are there any amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 656 is hereby ordered printed for third reading. Clerk will read the next bill.
Senate Bill 887, Senator King, County Board of Education, reappointment of incumbent county superintendent, authorization, favorable with one amendment.
Recognize the Vice Chair of the Committee as the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, sometimes our county gets lucky and we get a great superintendent of our public schools, and we want to keep him or her for as long as possible. So this bill said at any time the Board of Ed can say, we want you to stay so nobody poaches you. The committee thought that we needed to put a little bit of guardrails on it, so the amendment just says after 2 years. So it's not a month after the new person has arrived that we would make another 4-year commitment. So after 2 years, the board can vote and say, we definitely want you, so don't look at going elsewhere. So that's what we have done, and I'd like to move the one committee amendment and the favorable committee report.
Floor leader moves for the adoption of the one committee amendment and the favorable committee report. On the amendment, any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the one committee amendment is adopted. Question now is on the amended report. Any discussion? Any objection? Without objection, the amended report is adopted. Are there any further amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 887 is hereby ordered printed for third reading. Clerk will read the next bill.
Senate Bill 929, Senator Brooks, Work Group on Mail-in Ballot Accessibility, favorable.
Recognizing the bill sponsor as the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, this bill establishes a work group on mail-in ballots accessibility. 2, 1, examine processes and procedures in the in the state relating to mail-in ballot returns. 2, assess the impact on voters with disabilities of requiring mail-in ballots to be returned in paper form. 3, collect information about current practices and standards for accessible alternatives in other jurisdictions. And 4, evaluate alternatives. And 5, consult with subject matter experts as needed. The State Board of Elections must provide staff for the work group, and the work group must report its findings to and recommendations by December 31, 2025. The bill takes effect June 1, 2025, and terminates June 30, 2026. There was one committee amendment. The amendment adds new members to the work group, including representatives from the Disabilities Right Maryland, the Association of Deaf, the Maryland Association of Election Officials, and a multilingual individual with expertise in election administration. The impact is minor. I move the adoption of the one committee amendments and the favorable committee report.
All right. Floor leader moves to the adoption of the one committee amendment and the favorable committee report. Recognize the Vice Chair.
Thank you, Mr. President. As we've discussed, Senator, could we special order this bill until tomorrow for committee to consider another amendment?
Yes, we certainly can.
Thank you, Mr. President.
All right. Are there any objections from the floor? Senators move to special order the bill. Without objection, the bill will be special ordered to the appropriate time tomorrow. All right. Let's see. That does it for that calendar. Let's go to Budget and Tax, report number 5. Clerk will read the first bill.
Senate Bill 200, Chair, Budget and Taxation Committee, Board of Trustees of the Maryland Teacher and State Employees Supplemental Retirement Plans, renaming, favorable.
Recognizing the senator from Baltimore County as the floor leader.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Senate Bill 200 is actually a very simple bill. It just renames the Supplemental Retirement Plan and takes out the word teachers. There are no amendments. I move for adoption of the committee report.
Floor leader moves to the adoption of the favorable committee report. Any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the favorable committee report is adopted. Are there any amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 200 is ordered printed for third reading. Clerk, read the next bill.
Senate Bill 327, Senator Heddleman, Affordable Housing Payment in Lieu of Taxes Expansion Act, favorable with one amendment.
Recognize the bill sponsor as the floor leader.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Senate Bill 327, as amended, it's an authorizing bill. It allows each county government to exempt real property used for rental housing from the county property tax if the property owner maintains at least 25% of the rental housing units as affordable and enters into a pilot payment in lieu of taxes agreement with the county government for a period of at least 15 years. There's one committee amendment that lowers the required proportion of rental units that must be affordable from 50% to 25% and allows the pilot agreement to require a higher percentage. I move for adoption of the amendments and a favorable committee report.
All right, floor leader moves for the adoption of the one committee amendment and the favorable committee report. On the amendment, any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the one committee amendment is adopted. Question now on the amended report. Any discussion? Any objection? Without objection, the amended report is adopted. Are there any further amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 327 is hereby ordered printed for third reading. Clerk, read the next bill.
Senate Bill 341, Senator McCray, Baltimore City Raffles Organization affiliated with the Professional Major League Baseball team, favorable with two amendments.
Recognize the bill sponsor as the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate Bill 341 authorizes an organization located in Baltimore City that is affiliated with a professional Major League Baseball team that plays its home games in Baltimore City to conduct raffles. The organization must spend the majority of its funds in Baltimore City for fraternal, civic, and charitable purposes for the purposes related to veterans, hospitals, or amateur athletics. Before conducting a raffle, an organization must obtain a written permit from the designated agency within Baltimore City government. As amended, a raffle ticket may be sold and received on an electronic device with boundaries of just the stadium, and the raffle tickets must be sold and received no earlier than 1 hour before the official start of the baseball game and no later than the 7th inning in the baseball game. There are two committee amendments, Mr. President, making changes to the purpose paragraph, and amendment number 2 clarifies that the raffles must occur within the boundaries of Orioles Park, requires the age verification for a raffle ticket buyer, and terminates this bill within 3 years. Move adoption of the two amendments in the favorable committee report, Mr. President.
Floor leader moves for the adoption of the two committee amendments and the favorable committee report. On the amendments, any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the two committee amendments are adopted. Question now is on the amended report. Any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the amended report is adopted. Are there any further amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 341 is hereby ordered printed for third reading. Clerk will read the next bill.
Senate Bill 516, Senator King, Property Tax, Daycare Centers, Child Care Homes, and Child Care Centers, favorable with one amendment.
Let's see. Oh, yes, recognize the majority leader as the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate Bill 516 expands eligibility for a personal property tax exemption for specified child care homes to include large family child care homes. The bill also alters the eligibility for local real property tax credits for daycare centers and child care homes to include large family child care homes, and repeals the requirement that specified improvements to real property must be completed after a specified date in order to be eligible for the property tax credit. The bill specifies that the amount of the annual property tax credit for daycare centers and child care homes may not exceed $10,000 or the amount of property tax due. There's one committee amendment that adds sponsors, and I move adoption of the amendment and the favorable committee report.
Floor leader moves for the adoption of the one committee amendment and the favorable committee report. On the amendment, any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the one committee amendment is adopted. Question now on the amended report. Any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the amended report is adopted. Are there any further amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 516 is hereby ordered printed for third reading. Clerk, read the next bill.
Senate Bill 550, Senator McCray, Baltimore City Property Tax, authority to establish a subclass and special rate for property no longer used for nonprofit purposes, favorable to amendments.
Recognize the bill sponsor as the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate Bill 550 authorizes Baltimore City to be able to establish a subclass of real property consisting of real property that is owned by a nonprofit and as amended has been vacant and not been significantly improved for at least 5 consecutive taxable years. Baltimore City is authorized to set a special property tax rate for these respective properties, but they may not exceed a certain amount. Mr. President, there are 2 amendments. One is technical. The second amendment specifies that the mayor and city council can define significant improvement. Move adoption of committee amendments and the favorable committee report, Mr. President.
Floor leader moves to the adoption of the 2 committee amendments and the favorable committee report. On the amendments, any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the 2 committee amendments are adopted. Question now is on the amended report. Recognizing the minority leader as the question on the report.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. The floor leader would just yield for question, please.
Yes, sir.
Senator may proceed.
Certainly understand this is a local bill, but I did see opposition from the Catholic Conference. Were their concerns addressed, or how are they feeling about the bill?
I would assume that their concerns are addressed in reference to we moved it from 3 to 5 years, and we also made sure that we said that it had to be vacant. So these aren't properties that are producing something within the respective neighborhoods, but those 2 amendments stretched to 3 to 5, but also made clear that it has to be vacant.
Okay, and this is just to maybe move along the process of some vacant buildings and to get some type of renovation. Is that the intent?
The intent is that folks that do have properties within the city shouldn't leave them vacant for decades, not just 5 years, but for decades.
Right. Okay, I appreciate it. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. All right, any further discussion on the report? Any objections? Without objection, the favorable committee report as amended is adopted. Are there any further amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 550 is hereby ordered printed for 3rd reading. Clerk, read the next bill.
Senate Bill 572, Anne Arundel County Senators, Anne Arundel County Development Impact Fees, favorable, 2 amendments.
Recognizing the Vice Chair as the floor leader.
Thank you very, very much, Mr. President. This bill is a local bill. It just gives the authority for Anne Arundel County to provide waivers to its impact fees for various public purposes, including workforce housing, accessibility, moderately priced housing, and infrastructure. The amendment just does what I just said. The technical amendment, I move the amendments and the favorable report.
Floor leader moves to the adoption of the 2 committee amendments and the favorable committee report. On the amendments, any discussion? Any objection? Without objection, the 2 committee amendments are adopted. Question now is on the amended report. Any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the amended report is adopted. Are there any further amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 572 is hereby ordered printed for 3rd reading. Clerk, read the next bill.
Senate Bill 598, Senator Heddleman, Property Tax, Low-Income Housing Tax Credit, Valuation of Property, favorable, 2 amendments.
Recognizing the bill sponsor as the floor leader.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Senate Bill 598 is really a compromise. As amended, it requires DHCD to notify the SDAT, the Department of Assessments and Taxation, that a property has been awarded the federal low-income housing tax credit within 30 days of closing, so that SDAT can proceed with valuation of property in accordance with the current law. There are 2 amendments. The first is technical. The second strikes the original provisions of the bill and requires the notification that I just described. Move for the adoption of the committee amendment and the favorable committee report.
Floor leader moves for the adoption of the 2 committee amendments and the favorable committee report. On the amendments, any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the 2 committee amendments are adopted. Question now on the amended report. Any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the amended report is adopted. Are there any further amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 598 is hereby ordered printed for 3rd reading. Clerk, read the next bill.
Senate Bill 623, Senator Bailey, St. Mary's County Public Facilities Bond, favorable.
Recognizing the bill sponsor as the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate Bill 623 authorizes the St. Mary's County Commissioners to issue up to $71 million in general obligations of bonds for acquisition, construction, improvement, and renovation of public buildings, facilities, and public work projects. There were no amendments, and I move for the adoption of the favorable committee report.
Floor leader moves to the adoption of the favorable committee report. Any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the favorable committee report is adopted. Are there any amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 623 is hereby ordered printed for 3rd reading. Clerk, read the next bill.
Senate Bill 639, Senator McKay, Garrett County Bids and Contracts, Advertisement Exceptions, favorable.
Recognize Senator from District 6 as the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate Bill 639 is a local bill that exempts specified contracts and vehicles purchased by Garrett County for an existing requirement to have advertised for bids for a contract exceeding $15,000. It enters into a purchase or a work project of a contract for an indeterminate amount of goods or services produced as a as-needed basis over a period of time without advertising for bids, regardless of the contract. Again, it enters to a contract of the purchase for one or more vehicle for up to $100,000 without advertising for bids. There's no amendments. We move adoption of the favorable report, Mr. President.
All right, floor leader moves to the adoption of the favorable committee report. Any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the favorable committee report is adopted. Are there any amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 639 is hereby ordered printed for third reading. Clerk, read the next bill.
Senate Bill 693, Senator M. Jackson, State Retirement and Pension System, Reemployment Earnings Limitation, Maximum Average Final Compensation, favorable.
Recognizing the senator from Baltimore County is the floor leader.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. This bill, Senate Bill 693, is a joint committee on pensions bill. It exempts the retirement benefit offset specified retirees of the state retirement and pension system who are re-employed with a participating employer and whose average final compensation is less than the minimum annual salary on the standard pay scale. The bill also exempts specified disability retirees who are reemployed with a participating employer from a temporary suspension of benefits if their AFC is less than the minimum annual salary on the standard state pay scale. There are no amendments, and move adoption of the committee report.
Floor leader moves for the adoption of the favorable committee report. Any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the favorable committee report is adopted. Are there any amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 693 is hereby ordered printed for third reading. Clerk will read the next bill.
Senate Bill 698, Senator Quarterman, Washington County Sales and Use Tax Exemption Target Redevelopment Area, favorable.
Recognize the senator from District 2 as the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, this bill provides a state sales and use tax exemption over a 10-year period for the sale of construction materials for a target redevelopment area here in Washington County. There are no committee amendments. Move the adoption of the favorable report.
Floor leader moves to the adoption of the favorable committee report. Any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the favorable committee report is adopted. Are there any amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 698 is hereby ordered printed for third reading. Clerk will read the next bill.
Senate Bill 706, Senator Zucker, Gaming Problem Gambling Prevalence Study and Fund Revenue, favorable with one amendment.
Recognize the bill sponsor as the floor leader.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Colleagues, this is Senate Bill 706. I'm not going to spend too much time on this because this passed unanimously last year. Just wanted to thank Senator Klossmeyer, our former colleague, for her leadership on this. This just puts a certain percentage into the problem gaming fund as well as requiring a study. There's one committee amendment and adds every member of the Budget and Taxation Committee to the bill. I would move the committee amendment and the adoption of the favorable committee report.
Floor leader moves to the adoption of the one committee amendment and the favorable committee report. Any discussion on the amendment? Any objections? Without objection, the one committee amendment is adopted. Question now is on the amended report. Any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the amended report is adopted. Are there any further amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 706 is hereby ordered printed for third reading. Clerk will read the next bill.
Senate Bill 708, Senator Zucker, Sports Wagering, Independent Evaluation of Sports Wagering, Content Required, favorable with two amendments.
Recognizing the bill sponsor is the floor leader.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Colleagues, Senate Bill 708 is something that should look familiar to you because this also passed unanimously last year out of the Senate. This is requiring an independent validator for sports betting just to make sure that everything's legitimate. There is two amendments. One adds a sponsor. The second one adds that there needs to be at least three independent validators that are applying to provide this service. As amended, there's no opposition. I would move the two committee amendments and the adoption of the favorable committee report.
Floor leader moves to the adoption of the two committee amendments and the favorable committee report. On the amendments, any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the two committee amendments are adopted. Question now on the amended report. Any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the amended report is adopted. Are there any further amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 708 is hereby ordered printed for third reading. Clerk will read the next bill.
Senate Bill 730, Charles County Senators, Gaming, Charles County Gaming Permit Review Board, repeal, favorable.
Recognizing the senator from the 27th as the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, Senate Bill 730 proposes to replace the Charles County Gaming Permit Review Board, which is comprised of resident members, with an administrative review of gaming permit applications by the County Attorney's Office, followed by approval or denial by the County Board of County Commissioners. There were no amendments Move the adoption of the favorable committee report.
Floor leader moves for the adoption of the favorable committee report. Any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the favorable committee report is adopted. Are there any amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 730 is hereby ordered printed for third reading. Clerk will read the next bill.
Senate Bill 774, Senator Hershey, property tax, valuation of operating property of rural broadband service providers, favorable with 2 amendments.
Recognizing the senator from Montgomery County is the floor leader.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Colleagues, Senate Bill 774, as amended, just allows a county to enter into a payment agreement, a lieu of tax agreement with a local, with a broadband provider. There are 2 committee amendments. The first is technical. The second strikes the bill in its entirety to reflect what I said in the top of the remarks in terms of just authorizing a lieu of tax agreement. I would move the 2 committee amendments and the adoption of the favorable committee report.
Floor leader moves for the adoption of the 2 committee amendments and the favorable committee report. On the amendments, any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the 2 committee amendments are adopted. Question now is on the amended report. Any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the amended report is adopted. Are there any further amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 774 is hereby ordered printed for third reading. Clerk will read the next bill.
Senate Bill 862, Senator M. Jackson, State Retirement and Pension System, Administrative Fees, repeal, favorable with 2 amendments.
Recognizing the senator from Baltimore County is the floor leader.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Senate Bill 862, as amended, repeals a requirement that the state and local government employers pay admin fees to the state retirement and pension system. Instead, the bill requires that the normal contribution rate paid by an employer, as recommended by the state's actuary and certified by the board, include the amount necessary to cover SRPS's administrative and operational expenses. For FY26, the bill requires that SRPS's administrative and operational expenses be paid from the system trust. There are 2 amendments. The first makes technical changes to the title, and the second clarifies the local employer admin fee payment due June 21, 25 is still due and to be paid to the system, and it clarifies the system expenses shall be included in the employer contribution rates for fiscal year 27 and after, and makes a technical clarification. I move for the adoption of the amendments and the favorable and the committee report.
Floor leader moves to the adoption of the 2 committee amendments and the favorable committee report. On the amendments, any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the 2 committee amendments are adopted. Question now is on the amended report. Any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the amended report is adopted. Are there any further amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 862 is hereby ordered printed for third reading. Clerk will read the next bill. I'm sorry, that's the last one for that count. Let's go to report number 6. Clerk will read the first bill.
Senate Bill 414, Senator Waldstreicher, income tax credit, parent of stillborn child, favorable with 1 amendment.
All right, recognize the senator from District 6 as the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. As amended, Senate Bill 414 establishes a refundable state income tax credit for a parent of a stillborn child. The credit is equal to $1,000 for each birth for which a certificate of a birth resulting in a stillborn has been issued by the Maryland Department of Health, or for which a certificate of a fatal death or its equivalent has been issued by another state. The credit may be claimed only for the taxable year in which the stillborn occurred. The bill takes effect July 1st, 2025, and applies to every year beyond 2026. There's only 1 amendment. It's a sponsor. We move adoption of the amendment and the favorable report, Mr. President.
Floor leader moves to the adoption of the 1 committee amendment and the favorable committee report. On the amendment, any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the 1 committee amendment is adopted. Question now on the amended report. Any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the amended report is adopted. Are there any further amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 414 is hereby ordered printed for third reading. Clerk will read the next bill.
Senate Bill 453, Senator King, state contracts, prohibited provisions, favorable.
Recognize the bill sponsor as the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate Bill 453 clarifies provisions that prohibit the state from being subject to certain contract clauses. The bill clarifies a state contract cannot include a provision that limits the state's ability to recover the difference in the cost of a replacement contractor to perform the services not performed by the original contractor, to the extent that the sum of the amount paid to the replacement contractor and the amount paid to the original contractor exceed the cost provided for in the contract with the original contractor. The bill also clarifies that a state contract cannot include a provision that requires the state to agree to limit the liability for any direct loss to the state for bodily injury, death, or damage to property applies to real or tangible personal property of the state. There are no amendments. I move adoption of the favorable committee report.
Floor leader moves for the adoption of the favorable committee report. Any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the favorable committee report is adopted. Are there any amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 453 is hereby ordered printed for third reading. Clerk, read the next bill.
Senate Bill 472, Senator Rosapet, property tax improvements to property adjacent to rail stations, subclass special rate and penalty, favorable with 2 amendments.
Recognize the bill sponsor as the floor leader.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. This bill is purely authorizing for the City of Baltimore and county governments to give them some of the authority that the municipalities already have to set differential tax rates. The purpose of this is to encourage development around transit stops. It says that within 1 mile of a transit stop, the city or the county, Baltimore City or the counties, can set a differential rate on undeveloped land. That's the essence of it. Doesn't require anybody to do anything, but it's designed to encourage development around our transit stops. There's several amendments basically clarifying as well as making clear that only 5% of the revenue raised would go to the state. The reason for that is the state is the one that puts up the money for the transit projects. It adds the purple line, which was not in the original draft of the bill. I don't know what the sponsor was thinking when the bill was introduced. And then it has some other clarifying provisions. So there are 2 amendments, one doing what I just said, plus one adding sponsors and technical language. Move the amendments and the favorable report.
Floor leader moves for the adoption of the 2 committee amendments and the favorable committee report. On the amendments, any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the 2 committee amendments are adopted. Question now on the amended report. Any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the amended report is adopted. Are there any further amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 472 is hereby ordered printed for third reading. Clerk will read the next bill.
Senate Bill 663, the President Earned Income Tax Credit Notice of Eligibility Alterations, favorable.
Recognizing the senator from Frederick City is the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. This is a common sense cost-saving bill that was requested by the controller. It will authorize the controller to provide required notices to employers in the state regarding the earned income tax credit by electronic means. However, there is a provision that will allow regular snail mail if the employer needs or requests that. It is anticipated it will save at least $100,000 a year in postage costs. There are no amendments, therefore I move for adoption of the favorable committee report.
Floor leader moves for the adoption of the favorable committee report. Any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the favorable committee report is adopted. Are there any amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 663 is hereby ordered printed for third reading. Clerk will read the next bill.
Senate Bill 667, Senator Gazzone, gaming, slot machines, skills-based amusement devices, favorable with 1 amendment.
Recognize the senator from District 7 as the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, one of the joys of parenthood is taking your kids to dinner. One of the places they love to go is where they get to play those video games that give them the tickets, places like Dave & Buster's and parents' favorite, Chuck E. Cheese. Unfortunately, our Maryland State Lottery came out with a ruling a year ago that said they consider those games that give out those tickets to be slot machines. So it's caused an issue. Now they did grandfather in places in Worcester County, or the boardwalk where you go and you play skee ball. So what we said was, hey, we can't have that. We don't want to turn Chuck E. Cheese into a rat casino. So what this bill does is it came in and it fixed it. So what it does is it alters the definition of slot machine to exclude a machine, apparatus, or device that is a skills-based amusement device that awards prizes or merchandise, tickets, tokens, or other objects that per play do not exceed minimal value as approved by state lottery or gaming control commission regulation, and may be accumulated in exchange for non-cash merchandise or prizes of value that is similar to the accumulated value of the objects exchanged. Now, we did offer an amendment in which we did take in committee that prizes may not exceed $599. So mom and dad's hard-earned money that they give their kids to go play the game, that the kids can then exchange for pennies on the dollar for those prizes, this takes care of. So, Mr. President, I move favorable on the adoption of the committee amendment and favorable on the committee report.
All right, floor leader moves to the adoption of the one committee amendment and the favorable committee report. What if it's a crypto, non-cash? Interesting. I don't know. Yeah, I'm just kidding. I was sort of kidding. Yeah, I don't know. All right, on the amendment, any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the one committee amendment is adopted. Question now is on the amended report. Any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the amended report is adopted. Are there any amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 667 is hereby ordered printed for third reading. Clerk will read the next bill.
Senate Bill 795, Senator Mouts, State Procurement Preferences, Blind Industries, Services of Maryland, Packaging and Repackaging, favorable.
Recognize the Senator from Prince George's as the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate Bill 795 adds packaged and repackaged products to the list of janitorial products that a prime contractor on a maintenance contract with the state is required to purchase from Blind Industries and Services of Maryland. There are no amendments. Move adoption of the committee report.
All right, floor leader moves to the adoption of the favorable committee report. Any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the favorable committee report is adopted. Are there any amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 795 is hereby ordered printed for third reading. Clerk will read the next bill.
Senate Bill 860, Senator Quarterman, Gaming, Prohibition of Online Sweepstakes Games and Revenue from Illegal Markets, favorable.
Recognize the bill sponsor as the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate Bill 860 prohibits a person from operating, conducting, or promoting an online sweepstakes game in the state. An applicant for a specified gaming license, a person holding a specified gaming license, or others as specified affiliated with a person holding that license may not support that operation. There are no committee amendments. Move the adoption of the favorable committee report.
Floor leader moves to the adoption of the favorable committee report. Any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the favorable committee report is adopted. Are there any amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 860 is hereby ordered printed for third reading. Clerk will read the next bill.
Senate Bill 911, Senator Attar, Property Tax Exemption for Blind Individuals, alteration, favorable with one amendment.
Recognize the senator from St. Mary's as the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate Bill 911 expands an existing property tax exemption for blind individuals or their surviving spouses by increasing from $15,000 to $40,000 the amount of the assessed value of the individual's dwelling that is exempt from state and local property tax. There's one amendment that adds sponsors. Move adoption of the committee amendment and the favorable committee report.
Floor leader moves to the adoption of the one committee amendment and the favorable committee report. On the amendment, any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the one committee amendment is adopted. Question now is on the amended report. Any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the amended report is adopted. Are there any further amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 911 is hereby ordered printed for third reading. Clerk will read the next bill.
Senate Bill 963, Senator Mouts, Abandoned and Neglected Cemeteries Fund, Establishment and Income Tax Checkoff, favorable two amendments.
Recognize the senator from District 6 as the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate Bill 963, it establishes an abandoned and neglected cemetery fund authorized by the governor. What this fund does, it provides funds for care and provision and maintenance and restoration of abandoned and neglected cemeteries in the state of Maryland. By the 30th of September annually, the Secretary of Labor must report to the General Assembly of this administration of this fund. There's two amendments. It makes title change of the bill and removes language requiring an income tax checkoff authorized by the governor appropriating $250,000 in the annual budget. Those are two amendments. Move favorable for the amended and the favorable committee report.
Floor leader moves to the adoption of the two committee amendments and the favorable committee report. On the amendments, any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the two committee amendments are adopted. Question now is on the amended report. Any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the amended report is adopted. Are there any further amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 963 is hereby ordered printed for third reading. All right, through with budget and tax. Let's go to judicial proceedings. We're looking till about 1 today, so we'll see where we are at 1. So just keep that in mind for scheduling purposes. We'll kind of assess status at 1. All right, this is report 14 from judicial proceedings. Clerk will read the first bill.
Senate Bill 360, Senator Hester, revenge porn, civil action, and criminal offense, favorable.
Recognize the Senator from Montgomery County as the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate Bill 360 creates a civil offense of defamation per se against someone who distributes computer-generated visual representation that is indistinguishable from an actual visual representation of the person and is of a sexual or intimate nature, also known as deepfake porn. It also expands the criminal prohibition against revenge porn by including AI-generated images. There are no amendments. It passed the committee unanimously. I move the favorable committee report.
Floor leader moves for the adoption of the favorable committee report. Any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the favorable committee report is adopted. Are there any amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 360 is hereby ordered printed for third reading. Clerk will read the next bill.
Senate Bill 391, Senator Smith, Maryland Police Training and Standards Commission, review of report and recommendations, favorable.
Recognizing the bill sponsor as the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. A few years ago, we created the Office of the Independent Investigative Division within the Office of the Attorney General. This bill specifies that the Maryland Police Training Standards Commission has to review their annual report. Both MPTSC and the OAG were consulted for this bill. The bill passed unanimously. I'd move for the adoption of the favorable committee report.
Floor leader moves to the adoption of the favorable committee report. Any discussion on the report? Any objections? Without objection, the favorable committee report is adopted. Are there any amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 391 is hereby ordered printed for third reading. Clerk will read the next bill.
Senate Bill 585, Senator Wallstreicher, criminal law exception to armed trespass prohibition, retired law enforcement officials, favorable with one amendment.
Recognize the bill sponsor as the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. This bill corrects an oversight from a previous bill. It simply adds retired law enforcement to Section 6411. There is one committee amendment. The amendment adds sponsors. There's no fiscal note. This passed last year unanimously as an amendment. Mr. President, I move the one committee amendment and the favorable committee report.
Floor leader moves to the adoption of the one committee amendment and the favorable committee report. On the amendment, any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the one committee amendment is adopted. Question now is on the amended report. Any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the amended report is adopted. Are there any amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 585 is hereby ordered printed for third reading. All right, let's go to report number 15 out of judicial proceedings. Clerk will read the first bill.
Senate Bill 181, Senator Heddleman, correctional services, geriatric, and medical parole, favorable with 9 amendments.
Recognizing the chair of the committee as the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate Bill 81, as amended, this bill alters the eligibility requirements for medical parole. The bill also makes incarcerated individuals who are at least 65 years old and have served at least 20 years of their sentence eligible for geriatric parole. That's excluding individuals sentenced to life without parole and individuals required to register as sex offenders. Mr. President, there are 9 amendments. Amendment number 1 adds sponsors. Amendment number 2 is technical. Amendment number 3 alters the definition of chronically debilitated or incapacitated as it relates to the eligibility for medical parole. Amendment number 4 alters the eligibility requirements for medical parole. Amendment number 5 alters the eligibility requirements for geriatric parole. Amendment number 6 alters the frequency at which incarcerated individuals may be reconsidered for geriatric parole. Amendment number 7 makes a technical correction. Amendment number 8 repeals a now obsolete provision of the related to geriatric parole. And amendment number 9 adds uncodified language directing the parole commission to prioritize considering incarcerated individuals for medical parole and geriatric parole. Mr. President, I move for the adoption of the 9 committee amendments and the favorable committee report.
Floor leader moves to the adoption of the 9 committee amendments and the favorable committee report. On the amendments, any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the 9 committee amendments are adopted. Question now is on the amended report. Any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the amended report is adopted. I believe the chair has an amendment. The pages will collect and distribute the senators, the floor leader's amendment. Give us just a moment to load it up. All right, sir, may I explain the amendment?
Thank you, Mr. President. So under the bill, we've changed the considerations for medical parole. And if you go to page 7 of this bill, this basically applies those same factors to the recall provision for medical parole. That means if someone, for instance, gets better and they're recalled back to their facility, the same factors would apply for that consideration. Mr. President, I move for the adoption of the amendment.
All right, the floor leader moves the amendment. Any discussion of the amendment? Recognizing the minority whip on the amendment.
Mr. President, I wonder if we could have a little time to review the amendment and the bill and ask the bill to lie over under the rule.
All right, the motion is in order. The bill and the amendment will lie over under the rule. Clerk will read the next bill.
Senate Bill 648, Senator Muse, Correctional Services, Medical Parole, Life in Prison, favorable with one amendment.
Recognizing the bill sponsor is the floor leader.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. As amended, this bill repeals provisions requiring gubernatorial approval of a decision of the Maryland Parole Commissioner to grant medical parole to an incarcerated individual serving a term of life imprisonment with the possibility of parole. It's favorable with one amendment. The amendment simply adds sponsors. Move favorable on the bill and the amendment.
Floor leader moves to the adoption of the one committee amendment and the favorable committee report. On the amendment, any discussion? Any objection? Oh, excuse me. Recognize the chair of the committee on the amendment.
Thanks, Mr. President. I just asked the bill and the amendment lie over under the rules.
All right. The motion is in order. The bill and the amendment will lie over under the rule. All right. Let's go to report number 16. Clerk will read the first bill.
Senate Bill 158, Senator West, Estates and Trust, Maryland Trust Decanting Act, Notification, Document Transmittal, favorable.
Recognizing the bill sponsor is the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. This bill establishes provisions governing the methods by which notice may be given under the Maryland Trust Decanting Act. That's it. It's very simple. We passed the Decanting Act last year. This bill just adds a notice provision. There are no committee amendments. There's no opposition. The vote of the committee was unanimous. I hereby move the adoption of the favorable committee report.
Floor leader moves to the adoption of the favorable committee report. Any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the favorable committee report is adopted. Are there any amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 158 is hereby ordered printed for third reading. Clerk will read the next bill.
Senate Bill 581, Senator Henson, Civil Actions, Tortious Injury to Death of Pet, Compensatory Damages, favorable.
Recognize the bill sponsor is the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. This bill raises the maximum amount a pet owner can receive compensation when someone wrongfully injures or kills their pet.
Senator, just a little loud if we could give our attention to the senator on the floor, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. This bill raises the maximum amount a pet owner can receive for compensation when someone wrongfully injures or kills their pet from $10,000 to $25,000. It has no amendment and it was voted unanimously. Move the favorable committee report.
Floor leader moves to the adoption of the favorable committee report. Any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the favorable committee report is adopted. Are there any amendments to the bill or its title?
Mr. President?
Yes, recognizing the floor leader has an amendment.
I do have an amendment at the desk.
Senators will the pages will collect and distribute the senator's amendment. Give us just a moment to get it up on the board. All right, Senator may explain the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. President. The amendment adds to the bill's title the designation Buddies Law in honor of the pet who this was the genesis of this bill. Move the amendment.
All right, Senator moves the amendment. Any objections? Without objection, the amendment is adopted. Are there any further amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 581 is hereby ordered printed for third reading. Clerk will read the next bill.
Senate Bill 619, Chair, Judicial Proceedings Committee, Judiciary Commission on Judicial Disabilities, Temporary Appointment, favorable. This is the constitutional amendment.
Recognizing the bill sponsor, the chair of the committee is the floor leader.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. President. This proposed constitutional amendment, if approved by the voters at the next general election, will authorize the chair of the Commission on Judicial Disabilities, in the event that a member's recusal or disqualification or the expiration of the member's membership, to be replaced if to recall a former member to serve as a temporary substitute member, or to request that the governor appoint a temporary member to extend that member's term. Any substitute member is subject to the same qualifications that were applicable to the member for whom the substitute member is temporarily assigned. There are no committee amendments that pass committee unanimously. And move for the adoption of the favorable committee report.
Floor leader moves to the adoption of the favorable committee report. Any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the favorable committee report is adopted. Are there any amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 619 is hereby ordered printed for third reading. Clerk will read the next bill.
Senate Bill 622, Chair, Judicial Proceedings, Courts, State Reporter, Publication of Cases, favorable.
Recognizing chair of the committee is the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. This bill repeals a requirement for the state reporter to secure a copyright for the state of the Maryland opinions of the Supreme Court of Maryland and the Appellate Court of Maryland designated for publication by the respective courts. There are no committee amendments. Asking the committee unanimously move for the adoption of the favorable committee report.
Floor leader moves for the adoption of the favorable committee report. Any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the favorable committee report is adopted. Are there any amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 622 is hereby ordered printed for third reading. Clerk will read the next bill.
Senate Bill 629, Chair, Judicial Proceedings, Appellate Court of Maryland, Sessions at Educational Institutions, favorable with one amendment.
Recognize the chair of the committee as the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. This bill authorizes the Appellate Court of Maryland to hold a session at a secondary or post-secondary educational institution in the state as designated by the Chief Judge of the Appellate Court of Maryland in conjunction with the administration of the secondary and post-secondary educational institutions. Mr. President, there is one committee amendment. It makes a technical correction to a cross-reference in the bill. I'd move for the adoption of the one committee amendment and the favorable committee report.
Floor leader moves for the adoption of the one committee amendment and the favorable committee report. On the amendment, any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the the one committee amendment is adopted. Question now is on the amended report. Any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the amended report is adopted. Are there any further amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 629 is hereby ordered printed for third reading. Clerk will read the next bill.
Senate Bill 655, Senator Hester, Courts, Artificial Intelligence Evidence Clinic Pilot Program Establishment, favorable with two amendments.
Recognizing the senator from Harford County as the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate Bill 655 creates an artificial intelligence evidence clinic pilot program, that's a little bit of a tongue twister, with the courts to provide experts who at the ready can provide testimony on the authenticity of electronic evidence, particularly if the court believes it was created or altered by artificial intelligence. There were two committee amendments. One was technical and the other deletes sort of an RFP proposal language and substitutes a grant proposal program. The committee voted for the bill unanimously, and so I move the two committee amendments and the favorable committee report.
Floor leader move for the adoption of the two committee amendments and the favorable committee report. On the amendments, any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the two committee amendments are adopted. Question now on the amended report. Any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the amended report is adopted. Are there any further amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 655 is hereby ordered printed for third reading. It really is like a brave new world out there. It's all right. Clerk will read the next bill.
Senate Bill 797, Senator Mounts, Dorchester County, County Property Leases, Notice Exemptions, favorable.
Recognize the senator from District 1 as the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Now, Senate Bill 797 authorizes Dorchester County to enter into a lease on a county property without giving notice if the lease has a term of 5 years or less. Colleagues, there were no committee amendments. I therefore, Mr. President, move the adoption of the favorable committee report.
Floor leader moves for the adoption of the favorable committee report. Any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the favorable committee report is adopted. Are there any amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 797 is hereby ordered printed for third reading. From the eastern shore to the mountains. Got it covered. Before we go to the next one, recognize the senator from District 40 from Baltimore City.
Thank you, Mr. President. I appreciate the small commercial break. In the gallery behind you are Career Academy history students here in the Senate gallery. I'll ask them to please stand. I'm pleased to recognize these students from the Career Academy joining us in the gallery today as a part of history studies. History is not just a part of the past, it shapes the decisions we make in this chamber every day. Your interest in government and civic engagement is inspiring. I encourage you to stay informed, get involved, and consider how you can impact your community. Thank you to the students and educators for visiting. Please join me, colleagues, in welcoming these students from the Career Academy history class.
Welcome, welcome. And my wife used to teach at ACE, so she was there with Thread, so it's a great place, yeah. All right, let's see. All right, we are on report number 17. Clerk will read the first bill.
Senate Bill 338, Senator West, Baltimore County, Speed Monitoring Systems, Interstate 695 and Interstate 83, favorable with three amendments.
How things have changed. Recognize the Senator from the 42nd as the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. As amended, this local Baltimore County delegation bill authorizes the State Highway Administration to place up to 8 speed cameras on Interstate 695 in Baltimore County and 6 speed cameras on Interstate 83 in Baltimore County, subject to certain requirements. The bill takes effect June 1 of this year and terminates June 30th of 2030. There are 3 committee amendments. The first changes the sponsorship of the bill to the Baltimore County Senators. The second is technical. And the third allows the State Highway Administration to recover their costs from revenues collected by the cameras and gives the SHA sole responsibility for determining where the cameras will be deployed, allows the cameras to be unmanned, and modifies signage requirements. There were no amendments. There are 3 committee amendments. I move the 3 amendments and the adoption of the favorable committee report.
All right, floor leader moves for the adoption of the 3 committee amendments and the favorable committee report. On the amendments, recognize the minority whip on the amendments.
Could I just ask if the floor leader would yield for a question?
The floor leader yield for a question. Senator may proceed.
Certainly.
I understand it says it's a Baltimore County bill, but it is not really just going to impact Baltimore County, and it impacts all of our surrounding counties in a significant way. And I know sometimes there's some philosophical agreements and disagreements about speed cameras. Some of us hate them. Some folks, don't, which is fine. But can I ask, why was 95 not considered, the parts of Baltimore County on I-95 not considered if we're going to do 83 and 695?
Well, to be honest, a year ago, the delegation talked about 695 because there's so many accidents on 695. And then this past summer, I got a number of emails from constituents who live in North Baltimore County who said they no longer drive I-83 because it's too dangerous. They'll take Old York Road, winding around, stopping at traffic lights to get down to the Towson area instead of I-83 because of the danger on that highway. So my conclusion was let's add I-83. We never got around to I-95. That may be a bill for a future session.
And as I express my dislike of speed cameras, it isn't because I go speeding around myself. I think all of us occasionally get a little bit of a lead foot, but it's not really so much that, it's that the extrajudicial nature of speed cameras are a problem. Will someone who gets caught by these speed cameras be able to go to court to contest the?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. So you'll get a notice in the mail that you were found to be speeding. They'll send you a photograph of your car. The fine will be $40, and there are no points. So this is just like the Jones Falls Expressway speed camera bill we passed several years ago, which has markedly slowed down the traffic on the Jones Falls Expressway. So you get the $40, you can pay the $40 fine and have done with it. No points, nothing, no negative repercussions at all. Your insurance can't be affected, et cetera. Or you could go to court and contest it in court if you want to.
When you go to court, Mr. President, when you go to court, who are you facing?
Well, that's a good question. I assume you're facing someone who has responsibility for the speed. Probably all the cases are collected in one time, and the person responsible for the speed cameras will be there to testify that they were properly calibrated, they underwent all the checks that the bill requires them to undergo, and therefore the speed camera information was accurate.
But there will be an opportunity for theoretically cross-examination and questioning.
Oh yeah, and the bill specifically says if you want to challenge the calibration of the cameras, you have every right to do that.
It's interesting. A few years ago, I had a constituent that got a ticket, and they could prove that their vehicle was not there, and it was someone who never drives, hardly ever on 695, and we actually were able to prove it. But it went through an extensive period. This is before you could go to court. We've made some changes. So will law enforcement be reviewing these speed cameras, or is it just people who work at the company?
Well, the State Highway Administration receives all the information and will produce the notices and the citations. So yes, of course somebody reviews them.
And then I guess, remind me, because you were talking about where the funds go from this. Where will the funds go?
Yeah, the first of all goes to pay for the cost of the speed cameras. Right. And then with any leftover money, it goes to maintain the Beltway and I-83 North.
When you say maintain, does that mean like into the Transportation Trust Fund, the State Transportation Trust Fund?
I don't know exactly how the money is dispersed, but it's specifically limited to repairing the Baltimore Beltway and I-83 North. It can't be used out in some other county, for example.
Okay, and and
Nothing in Carroll County.
so will this program be entirely run by the state, or will Baltimore County be a part of
No,
running the
it's
program?
entirely run by the state. Baltimore County has no control over the Beltway at all, or I-83.
So this is not really a local bill then?
Well, it is a local bill, and it only affects Baltimore County. Now, interestingly, the Beltway does go into Anne Arundel County, so this would not affect the Anne Arundel County of the part of the Beltway.
And does the whole $40 stay with the, other than the cost of the cameras, does the whole $40 stay with the state?
Yes.
Okay.
I have some crash data if you're interested.
You know, there's a lot. Let me ask you one final question, and then my questions will have been answered. Why is there not an increased enforcement with live police?
Well,
and does Baltimore County have the ability to police I-83 and 695?
No, Baltimore County policemen are not on I-83. It would be state people. But Baltimore County and the State Highway Administration has exactly the same problem. In the last couple of years, the police forces have been depleted dramatically. And there are huge vacancies on both the Baltimore County Police Force and the Maryland State Police. I won't go into all the reasons for that, but we've talked about that in the past. Because they are so depleted, they don't have enough officers to put human beings out there live on the road holding a speed camera looking at your car anymore. That's why we have to deploy them on poles.
Thank you very much for the answers to the questions. Another in a long line of self-inflicted wounds our state has done on itself by making it much tougher to recruit and train and keep police officers. It seems to be a theme this session, and now we punish people by having extrajudicial speed cameras that can just track you, and you don't have any ability to have any context of how fast traffic was moving. All it is just if the machine's calibrated. I mean, it's fair to say you can't go to court in this situation and argue I was keeping up with the flow of traffic.
I don't think that works, but let's be clear. You can't get a citation unless you're driving at least 12 miles an hour over the speed limit. So you can go 11 miles an hour over the speed limit with impunity. It's just when you exceed the 11 miles an hour and go 12. And by the way, I walked last Saturday morning with Paul Wiedefeld, who's the Secretary of MDOT, and we were chatting about this bill, and he said, Chris, do you know how fast we've tracked cars going on the Baltimore Beltway?
Oh, I believe
Over
it.
110 miles an hour. So
Seems like
there's your
something law
problem we're trying to
enforcement
solve
should
here.
look into. Yeah, okay. All right. Well, I appreciate it. Thank you for the answers to the questions. Mr. President, I have some objections to this, but I think the chair of judicial proceedings may have some thoughts to offer as well. I will go ahead and sit down. Thank you.
All right. On the committee amendments?
Off the amendments.
After. All right. On the committee amendments, yes, recognized Senator from Prince George's on the committee amendments.
Will the floor leader yield a couple of questions?
Absolutely.
We've had speed cameras on a variety of roads in Maryland for quite a while. Yeah. Was there testimony as to whether they actually reduce speeding?
Yes. Well, I'm not sure testimony, but there was lots of apocryphal reports from the Jones Falls Expressway. I voted against that bill. The senator from Pikesville will recall I voted against that bill 3 years ago when we passed it, and I realize now that that bill was a good idea because the traffic on the Jones Falls Expressway is moving much more slowly. They predicted 3 years ago how much money they would collect from the fines. They collected a small fraction of that money because the cars in the Jones Falls Expressway are traveling at speed, or not 12 miles over speed, which means they're not issuing the number of citations they anticipated at the time we passed that bill.
So you'd consider that some evidence that speed cameras actually encourage people to drive more slowly?
I think, and I travel to Jones Falls all the time. I've noticed the cars are traveling much more slowly.
So you would consider yourself an expert witness on that question?
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you. That's one question. Second question is, there's a lot of talk about government efficiency these days. Yeah. Federal level, state level, the need for government efficiency. Would you say that putting speed cameras in place of police officers enforcing the speeding laws would be a move towards government efficiency?
Yes. To be honest with you, for example, they originally drafted this bill to require the police officer to be sitting in cars next to the cameras, just like is currently the case in the work zones. I've never could figure why we have that. And I said, take that out. I don't want live policemen sitting next to the cameras. As long as the cameras can work without the live policeman there, let's have the policeman do something useful.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator. All right, Senator from the 40th District.
Thank you, Mr. President. Would the floor leader yield?
Absolutely.
Senator, may proceed.
This bill does sound very familiar. I was wondering, so as I read the fiscal note, and I'm not sure if the amendments reflect this, it sounds like there's a request for 6 cameras on 83 and 8 cameras on 695. So it's a total of 14 cameras?
Well, up to.
Up
It's
to 14
within the, it's, by the way, it's an enabling piece of legislation. The State Highway Administration doesn't have to put any cameras, but this enables them, if they want to put up to 4 cameras going one way on the Beltway and 4 cameras going the other way, and up to 6 cameras on I-83 North, which is from the Beltway all the way to the Pennsylvania line. And that's a long distance, so 3 cameras in one direction and 3 in the other.
So that raised another question. And so does the bill actually specify the total amount of cameras that's allowable going in each direction of the highway? Does this
Yes.
bill specify that?
Yeah, it specifically says up to 4 in each direction of the Beltway, up to 3 in each direction on I-83 North.
Got you. And so on 83, which, 83 is obviously shared with the city, I'm not sure how long that portion of 83 is that encompasses Baltimore County. Do you have an idea of the distance that would be allowable between each of the cameras along 83?
No.
How long is the Baltimore County?
We authorized the State Highway Administration to make the decision where the cameras are going to go. And I just noticed last week in a newspaper article, they're going to change the locations of the cameras on the Jones Falls Expressway. So they may do that from time to time with respect to the cameras that they mount on the Beltway and on I-83 North too. It's entirely within their discretion.
Right. And so I know currently with the camera system that Baltimore City has, it's mandated that only one camera can operate in any given direction at any
Yes.
time. Is it possible with this legislation as amended that all 16 cameras could 14 cameras could possibly be operating at the very same time?
Yeah, I'd have to go back into the bill, and nobody's on the phone with committee. My recollection is that on the Beltway, no more than 2 can operate at a time. And of course, the SHA can change which 2 are operating, and people won't know whether the camera's operating or not. Right. I can't recall on I-83 North whether 2 can or 1 can at a time. If you really want me to do it, I'll go back in the bill and find that information.
Yeah, I would love to find that information and then probably later talk to committee about possible amendments. The other thing, in response to a question earlier, it was stated that the majority of the funding would go towards repairing the roads. But in our experience in Baltimore City, the majority of the funding and the first people that get paid is the private vendor that's administering the program. Is that still the same case in this bill as well? That the
No, I
that
believe
the vendor
this
receives?
is. I believe the SHA controls the cameras, runs the program, sends out the notices. I don't think there's a private vendor involved.
That's great. Can you just verify for us that there's no plan to contract the cameras out to a private industry, that these would be run by State Highway Administration and provide us with that?
Yes, I can. I'll get you that information.
Thank you so very much. I think there's going to be some other questions, Mr. President, but I may want to come back in a couple.
All right. Senator from the 45th District.
Thank you, Mr. President. And just a couple questions in reference to, I'm glad that you acknowledged some of the faults in reference to those that did rise when we brought this issue 3 years ago. So when we did that bill 3 years ago, there was big controversy about 2 cameras. So when you thought of this, we still have 2 cameras. We don't have 6 cameras. We don't have 8 cameras. Have you thought about the reasoning why you would have up to 6? What do you need 6 cameras for when there was big controversy for 2 cameras on 83?
Yes, well, the Beltway is much longer. I-83 South, the Jones Falls Expressway, is not a long road. It's about 10 miles. And the Beltway from way over in Essex all the way around the top side and then down the west side to the Patapsco River, where you cross into Anne Arundel County, is a much longer highway. And the conclusion was that we should have more cameras because it's a much longer piece of road. I-83 North, from the Beltway to the Pennsylvania line, I don't have the exact mileage, but I would guess it's 20 to 23 miles long, considerably longer than the Jones Falls Expressway piece.
Yep. And a number of times on this respective floor, the city is criticized when we do specific initiatives. I just wanted to make clear, when we were thinking about our 83, like we maintain the roads on 83, it was at a point in time where we were keeping control of the respective safety. That's not the situation in this specific example, correct?
No, that's not right. Excuse me, that is correct. Baltimore County has no control over the Beltway or I-83. I learned that because when this bill was first introduced a year ago, I put down that Baltimore County would do it, and I quickly got a call from the county executive's office. We have no control over the road. You need to change. And so we ended up devolving the responsibility on the State Highway Administration. If I could, let me just give you, to put some context in this, in the last 6 years, on this section of I-95 and I-83 we're talking about, there have been 20,506 crashes. Over 20,000 crashes. 6,697 of them are attributable to speeding, and there were 94 fatalities. We're talking about very dangerous roads.
And I just want to reemphasize that during that point 3 years ago, we were talking about that this was a local bill for the respective city, and we do have a stronger argument because we actually maintained the roads and kept the public safety from that standpoint. But there was a heightened concern about the folks that were coming north of 83 and how they would be impacted. Can you talk about how the folks from the south of 83 would be impacted when they step to these 6 cameras, not 2 cameras?
Well, the easy way not to be impacted is to drive 11 miles over the speed limit or less. That's the easy answer. So if the speed limit on the Beltway is 55 miles an hour, you can drive 66 miles an hour and not get a ticket. It's only when you start going over that, and believe me, because I drive the Beltway a lot, I'll be driving, especially in the evening, coming back from here. It's not at all unusual for cars to go shooting past me like rocket ships, 80, 90, 100 miles an hour. Scary. I've never run into quite that speed on the Jones Falls Expressway, but you do get those speeds on the Beltway and on I-83 North.
So it does sound like deja vu from 3 years ago where we were making the case, showing the data in reference to the accidents, in reference to the challenges that we were having on our respective Fallsway and 83. But now I want to dig into the bill and just ask some questions because I think you acknowledge how great the city took initiative. We stepped forward. We were on the right side of history when we did this from that standpoint. And that don't happen pretty often in this respective change.
I want to compliment the city for having taken this initiative. It turns out to have worked out magnificently. And it's a testimony to your success that in Baltimore County we want to replicate it.
Yep. So some of the things that the city did within the city bill, Mr. President, 3 years ago, one of the things I see in here is that it does have a sunset. Does it have a report after the sunset?
I don't think I don't remember there being a report, but the State Highway can give us the same crash data in 5 years that I have today, and I bet you're going to find a whole lot fewer crashes if people are driving at speed.
I just think that that's a possible amendment. I know that even when we were making the case 3 years ago for the city that we had this in here, we'll come back to the legislature and letting them know how this was impacted. I think that vice versa for the county, it should be expected. The other piece that the city had in there, Mr. President, was warnings. So we actually did a certain period because of the concern that came from this body. I think that we did 60 or 90 days in just warning tickets that we were pushing out. Can you speak to whether that's inside the bill?
That's in this bill.
That is in the bill.
Actually, the State Highway Administration wanted to eliminate that. They submitted proposed amendments, and I took the rest of their amendments but did not take that one.
Was it equivalent to the same amount of warning time that the city gave?
Yeah, 6 months.
Okay. The next one, when I think about the speed cameras, especially when I think about 695, the work zones, there was a great idea that came from the senator from the Western Maryland in reference to like blue lights that were approaching in reference to when people were coming. Was there any type of sensors outside of the signage that you were talking about in reference to these speed cameras?
Well, there is the same requirement that you have on the Jones Falls Expressway, that before you get to the camera, there is a sensor that tells you there's a speed limit sign that tells you what the speed is, and a sensor that tells you how fast you're going. So if you realize you're going considerably over the speed, you can cut your speed and not get a ticket. Yep. So the same thing applies on the Beltway.
Mr. President, it's still on the bill. More comments instead of questions at this point in time. There are a number of times, colleagues, where it gets challenging on this floor because Baltimore City is put in a certain posture. And 3 years ago, when we talked about this 83 bill, that was the case in reference to me, and we had to stand up and represent our city. I'm glad that the county sees the light. I'm glad that they're moving in the same posture and following the city from that standpoint. But I will come back with a couple of amendments, Mr. President, on this respective bill, just to make sure that we're moving in the right direction. And like I said, I'm thankful for my colleague from the county for recognizing that.
Senator from District 11. Thank you, Senator.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I just want to stand, well, actually, I do have a question.
Will Senator yield? Senator may proceed.
Oh, sure, absolutely.
We've been talking a lot about speed, and you did mention some crash data and the extraordinary number of crashes that take place on 695 in the county and in 83. Do you have any idea how many fatalities there have been on each of those roads? I mean, because we are talking, it seems to me, about saving lives, and I'll let you answer the question in 1 second. But and to the gentleman from Baltimore City's remarks, I voted for the bill 3 years ago, and my colleague and I did have this very conversation because
on this floor,
that part of 83 splits our district, goes right down the center of it, and he said it's going to be our constituents. Many of them have paid, who will pay those fines for going too fast around that Pepsi sign. And thankfully, the speed has come down there tremendously, and crashes have been avoided, and lives have been saved. And that's what this seems to me this conversation is about. So if we can, and look, speed cameras are not popular. I had this conversation in my own household. They are not popular, but they save lives. And since COVID, I think all of us have experienced the fear of looking in our rearview mirror and seeing somebody barreling down at us, and it is terrifying. I have been to my town halls and have asked people and have been surprised by the answer that many of them have said is that they welcome this. Now, I hope people will respond, but I do want to say, too, that you, to your credit, the gentleman from Baltimore County, to his credit, has said in community meetings that he was wrong 3 years ago and now is bearing this bill. So if you could answer my question about the deaths and fatalities, if you know.
Yes, I do, but I can't break it out between I-83 North and the Beltway. The State Highway Administration provided me with aggregate data, 94 fatalities in the past 6 years on the Baltimore County portion of the Beltway and I-83 North to the Pennsylvania line. 94 deaths.
And do you have any idea how many deaths were prior to the installation of cameras on the city part of 83?
I don't have that information.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much.
Sure.
All right. Interestingly, we have, and I won't use the company's name, but there is a demo vehicle outside for what will happen when there are autonomous vehicles, which is an interesting dynamic, which will have a whole new impact on all of this. But recognize the Senator from District 40.
Thank you for that information, Mr. President. Those vehicles that you referred to are very prevalent in the Phoenix, Arizona area. They do not get on the highway, though, because the technology hasn't evolved enough to get on the highway in this case. There still remains a lot of questions about this bill. I think I'll trust the floor leader and the delegation in their efforts to bring about safety. And so I get that it's about safety. I think this bill before us, it may be, a little bit too excessive in identifying it until we're able to get some of our questions answered, as well as I think the senator promised to get us some information on where the funding would go. I'd like to special order this bill till Thursday for the purposes of amendment.
All right, senators move to special order bill to Thursday. Let's hear from the floor leader, followed by the chair of the committee. Yields to the chair of the committee.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd wonder if the senator from Baltimore City would just hold off on his motion or retract his motion, so I could just add a technical amendment before you do it, and I'm happy to honor the special order. I'm trying to get this off my desk. That's all.
Understood. Yeah, sure.
Questions
I
on the
withdraw
special-
my amendment for the purpose. My motion for the purpose of the amendment.
Appreciate it.
All right, we still have to adopt the committee amendments, though. So we can still do it on second reader. It's just, yeah. I mean, look, it is what it is. If we withdraw the special order for now, Question before the body is on the 3 committee amendments. Any discussion of the, any additional discussion of the 3 committee amendments? If not, any objections? Without objection, the 3 committee amendments are adopted. Question is on the amended report. Any discussion of the amended report? Any objections? Without objection, the amended report is adopted. The chair of the committee has a technical amendment. Let's go ahead. The pages will collect and distribute the technical amendment.
They keep that amendment open in special order, and special order we can adopt it first, and then or leave it open. Leave it pending. Okay, fine. That's fine.
All right. Senator may explain the amendment.
So thank you, Mr. President. Just advised by council that this is in need of a technical amendment. This is a purely technical amendment. I move the amendment.
Senator has moved the amendment. Does the senator have another motion?
I'd like to then, because it's closed up, I'm going to motion just to lay it over because. No, you don't want to lay it over.
Special order till Thursday.
Well, okay. So the amendment, we can take up the amendment. The question is, you want to take up the amendment? It'll be okay. I mean, we can special order it with it open.
You can special order afterwards after the adoption.
So
that's fine.
All right. Question is on the technical amendment. Any discussion of the amendment? Any objections? Without objection, the technical amendment is adopted. Recognize the senator from District 40.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to special order Senate Bill 338 till Thursday.
All right. Senator moves to special order the bill to the appropriate time on Thursday. Are there any objections? Without objection, so ordered. All right. Clerk will read the next bill.
Senate Bill 418, Carroll County Senators, Carroll County Prospective Employees and Volunteers Criminal History Records Check, favorable.
Recognize the senator from the 42nd as the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. This is going to take a longer debate than the last one, let me warn you. This local bill authorizes the Carroll County Department of Human Resources to request a state and national criminal history records check from the Criminal Justice Information System Central Repository for any prospective employee or volunteer of Carroll County by repealing a provision that limits which employees or volunteers may undergo a criminal background check. There were no committee amendments. There was no opposition. The vote of the committee was unanimous. I hereby move the adoption of the favorable committee report.
Floor leader moves to the adoption of the favorable committee report. Any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the favorable committee report is adopted. Are there any amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 418 is hereby ordered printed for third reading. Clerk will read the next bill.
Senate Bill 833, Senator Charles, Family Law, Treatment Foster Care Homes, Child Care Stipends for Private Providers, favorable with 2 amendments.
Recognize the bill sponsor is the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. As amended, this bill requires the Department of Human Services to study what types of state support would be appropriate and beneficial to assist private providers of treatment foster care homes and report its findings to the General Assembly on or before December 1, 2025. There are 2 committee amendments. One is technical, and amendment number 2 strikes the bill and makes it this study bill.
All right. Floor leader moves to the adoption of the 2 committee amendments and the favorable committee report. On the amendments, any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the 2 committee amendments are adopted. Question now is on the amended report. Any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the amended report is adopted. Are there any further amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 833 is hereby ordered printed for third reading. All right, we got through a bunch today. The desk is clear, so we're cleared out for the day. We've got the hard stuff for tomorrow floor session, so we'll see where we get. Let's check in on timing for committees. Finance Committee.
Mr. President, Finance will meet at 1:45. I'm sorry. Yeah, 1:45.
1:45 for Finance. It is right. I was just making sure that the clock had sprung forward, so. Yes, yeah. All right. Chair of Education, Energy, and the Environment.
Thank you, Mr. President. Triple E meet at 1:30 for bill hearings, followed by immediately by a voting session. Thank you.
Excellent. Budget and Tax.
Thank you, Mr. President. 1:45 for voting, then Capital at 2:30, and then tomorrow morning at 8:30. Tomorrow morning at 8:30 voting.
Thank you, Senator. Judicial Proceedings?
Thank you, Mr. President. The Judicial Proceedings Committee will meet today at 1:45 for bill hearings, and then we'll follow that with a voting session.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Mr. Chair, let's see, other standing committees, select committees, joint committees, delegations. Yes, recognizing the Prince George's County delegation.
Yes, Mr. President. Colleagues from Prince George's County, we will meet tomorrow at 6 p.m. in the Neal Conference Room, or session permitting, delegation meeting tomorrow, 6 p.m. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Senator. Any further announcement? Yes, recognize the Senator from District 10.
Yes, Mr. President, the Veterans Caucus will meet tomorrow, March 12th at 8 a.m. in the House Office Building, City Delegation Room 145. It will be a nonprofit day. We will have 4 nonprofits from across the state that provide services to veterans. Among these attending or Let Vets Speak, Tunnel to Tower Foundation, Warriors Legacy Care, and iCommunity Connection Services. And also breakfast with the governor will be on Tuesday, March 25th at 8 a.m. sharp. Thanks.
Thank you, Senator. All right, Senator from Montgomery County.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you for laying up my announcement. Colleagues, I have a bill this year on autonomous vehicles, and so we have a little show and tell today. Waymo has a vehicle on Lawyers Mall. You can take a little trip, you can look around, see how these autonomous vehicles work. They should be here, they said about 1-ish, until 1-ish, but given how late we are, they may be a little bit later. But I encourage you to check it out. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you, Senator. Yes, Senator from Anne Arundel.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Colleagues, I have a shadow today. She walked in on the porta potty discussion. Fortunately, the discussion went all uphill from there. Tyler Dixon, she's her family are dear friends of mine, neighbors. Her grandmother, you may see her often in the Senate and around in offices. Priscilla, she advocates on behalf of AARP. Tyler is also in her first year at the United States Coast Guard Academy. I think they're called fourth class. That's right? Okay, I got it correctly. So if you just give her a round of applause, please.
Welcome.
And then, Mr. President, we also have a birthday today.
Uh-oh.
Permission to use the senator's name.
Please proceed.
If everyone can give a round of applause to Senator Joanne Benson on her birthday. Hey! Happy birthday.
She is so excited for her 34th year around the globe. Yes. All right, excellent. Happy birthday, Senator. Happy birthday. All right, Senator from the 37th? Nope. All right. Anything else for the good of the order? Recognize the Senator from Prince George's.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, this Friday, something happened. The National Fire Academy in Emmitsburg is now another casualty of the Trump administration's funding freezes and staffing cuts. If you don't know, Emmitsburg is in Frederick. And what we found is that whether you're a Democrat or Republican, no area is immune. And we as state legislators must stay vigilant. The National Fire Academy is a part of FEMA. And this is where the executive levels and those folks come from all over the country to get their training. All right, we saw how important this type of training is and what happened in California. And so we, as legislators, must remain vigilant. We must continue to work with those entities in our areas because these things are not going away. And if you're going to do an assessment of an organization or government agency, you don't do it by a cease and desist. You don't stop folks who have already purchased plane tickets who are on their way for very important training and just stop it altogether. So I just wanted to raise that to you all's attention if you were not aware, but this is something else that impacts us directly in the state of Maryland. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator. And look, on a completely nonpartisan basis, we just got a new report by Moody's that shows that Maryland is the most exposed state in the entire country from these cuts. So when we talk about fire training, Maryland was just rated the #1 most exposed state. So this is having real impact on people's lives, on safety. We just, this is the reality of what's happening. So it's going to be an interesting year. All right. Anything else for the good of the order? If not, let's do a quorum call.
Mr. President?
Has everyone recorded their presence? If so, the clerk will take the call. With 45 members in the chamber and a quorum being present, the Senate of Maryland remains in session, recognizing the Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move the Senate of Maryland stand adjourned until Wednesday, March 12th at 10 a.m.
Without objection, so ordered.